Hello, this is Dylan Moore with iRead TV, which you can find at iRead.tv. This is part 3 of a 3-part series on intellectual self-defense entitled The Chain of Responsibility. If you're here without having listened to part 1 first, go back and listen to it first. Part 3 is not going to be very understandable if you don't have the framework and foundation from part 1. If you're here having skipped part 2, you will be okay. There are some sections of part 3 where it'll be a little bit unfamiliar if you skip part 2, but in general, you'll be fine. It's not like part 1, which without part 1, part 3 is not understandable. Now, in part 3, we're going to be taking the entire framework, the entire concept that I've been putting forth on intellectual self-defense and turning it into a dynamic skill. Once you grasp the ideas and concepts that I'm putting forth here, it's going to be like a veil is lifted from your eyes. You're going to start seeing manipulation and sophistry everywhere where you were blind to it before, even when it was right in front of your face. This is by far my favorite of the 3 parts, so let's get right into it. All right, part 3, the chain of responsibility. This is where we bring out the big guns. I really want you to be excited for this. I'm super excited for this. If you thought parts 1 and parts 2 were cool by helping you understand manipulation and sophistry, we're going to completely leave that in the dust with part 3. So before we get into part 3, let's do a quick recap of the first 2 parts. So part 1 was the 4 circuits of human interaction. This is where we're really looking at how do we define manipulation? How do we define sophistry? So we've got 4 circuits that we all interact on. Circuit 1 is the biosurvival circuit, which exists on one dimension where we can physically approach or physically retreat from something. Circuit 2 is the emotional dominant circuit. This is where win-lose interactions occur, and this is also on a singular dimension where I can either dominate you or I submit to you. There's no in-between. Circuit 3 is where win-win interactions start to become possible. This is the semantic circuit or the rational circuit. This is where the concept of speech, the concept of ideas, the concept of logic, the concepts of argument, debate, discussion, all that exists on circuit 3. And like I said, this is where win-win interactions can begin to occur. The 4th circuit we can call the moral taboo circuit, which is, and I meant to say about circuit 3, there is no particular dimension about circuit 3. You could say there's 0 dimensions, or you could say there are infinite dimensions, because we can create and destroy dimensions with semantics as we need them in order to discuss. In circuit 4, we go back to having a singular dimension, which is understanding not understanding the difference, but being able to conceptualize the difference between right and wrong. Important point. Just because you can conceptualize it doesn't mean you understand it. Now, there are 2 basic principles when it comes to communicating with each other based on these 4 circuits. The first principle is that we must be on the same circuit in order to communicate. If I'm shouting at you and you are swinging a baseball bat at me, are we having a second circuit shouting interaction, or are we having a first circuit baseball bat smacking interaction? We're obviously having a first circuit interaction, and the shouting doesn't do much. I mean, maybe the shouting has a first circuit interaction of, hurting my ears, so you're making me wince so the baseball bat doesn't hit so hard, but I think you get my point. The second principle, and this is the principle, like I've mentioned in the previous 2 parts, this is the principle on which my entire theory hinges upon, which is that the lower circuit sets the interaction if 2 people are attempting to engage each other on separate circuits. Okay, going back to the baseball bat and the shouting, the lower circuit sets the interaction. Now, in most cases, the difference between these 2 is very obvious, except between circuits 3 and 2. I call it the 3-2 slip, and the same asterisk point that I put on the last 2 parts is that you could also have a 4-2 slip, like we could be having a rational conversation or a moral conversation and slip into the second circuit. When I say 3-2 slip, I really mean 3 or 4-2 slip. Now, my definition of sophistry, as I have put it in the framework of these 4 circuits, is the act of appearing to engage with someone on the 3rd circuit when in reality engaging them on the 2nd circuit. And remember, the 3rd circuit is where win-win can happen. The 2nd circuit is win-lose, dominate, submit. So essentially, it's a trick. It's manipulation because I am attempting to keep, if I'm engaging in sophistry, I am attempting to appear to be on the Third Circuit to keep you on the Third Circuit when in reality, I'm trying to dominate you. I get all the benefits of dominating you without the risk of you retaliating because you don't understand that you're being attacked. That's the premise, the definition of manipulation. Now, on a recap of part 2, we really looked at kind of this four circuits angle from a formal logic point to say, okay, where exactly is this line between circuit 3 and between circuit 2? Because we looked at the syllogism in part 1 and said, okay, we need the syllogism in order to interact in part 3, but we didn't really dissect it. And when we dissected it in part 2, we saw that it's not just the syllogism that needs to be interrupted, that needs to be faked, needs to be incorrect in order for a 3-2 slip to happen. On the logical side, like there's such a thing as a logical syllogism where you write the syllogism out and it just very clearly doesn't make sense. There is also a grammatical error, a grammatical fallacy that could occur where the syllogism actually looks like it's correct, but the individual observations are fallacious. Now, I looked at an example utilizing the word discipline where I said, hey, when we look at the definition of discipline and we see that that discipline has a noun, it has an adjective, and it has a verb form, the noun and the adjective form have a much different definition from the verb form. The verb form implies punishment. The verb form is a Second Circuit concept. Punishment is a Second Circuit concept. If I can punish you, that means I get to dominate you. If I wasn't able to dominate you, I wouldn't be able to punish you, right? I mean, does that make sense? So, whereas if I'm disciplined or I have discipline, well, I just have willpower to do things that I don't like to do. I'm disciplined because I take a cold shower every morning or whatever, right? So, I gave this example of there's two syllogisms here of a disciplined person makes their bed every morning. I did not make my bed this morning, therefore I am not a disciplined person. I am not a disciplined person. People should be disciplined, therefore someone should discipline me. Now, to the uninitiated, this makes sense. This checks out from a logical, syllogistic perspective. But when we break it down grammatically and we say, okay, what's the meaning of the word? We can see that, hey, wait a minute, the meaning of the word shifted. And different from a typical formal logic strategy, which is to attempt to call out the fallacy, which there's nothing wrong with it, but I think there's a better method. Instead of attempting to call out the fallacy, all I need to do is say, okay, at the beginning, the word discipline was Third Circuit. A disciplined person makes their bed every morning. That's just an observation. At the end, punishment has come into the equation. Therefore, someone should discipline me. And my point that I want to make, which is different typically from what you learn in a formal logic class, is I don't care what happened in the middle. Okay? In sentence number 5 here, that's exactly where the 3-2 slip occurs, where people should be disciplined, is I can't tell if you're using the adjective, people should be disciplined, or you're using the passive tense of the verb. People should be disciplined. One circuit 3, one circuit 2. We've melded them together where it's not clear which one it is, and so we go in with circuit 3 and we come out with circuit 2. The 3-2 slip in this example is exactly on line 5. However, I don't even need to know that. Or even what's the name of the fallacy? Who cares? Because I know there's a 3-2 slip in there somewhere. We started with circuit 3, we ended with circuit 2. That's all I need to know that I am in the process of someone trying to manipulate me. That's the recap of part 2. This, as I've said, is the 3-part course. We've gone over the 4 circuits, which is defining manipulation. We've gone over the line of reason, which is identifying manipulation. And now we're going to identify manipulation fast. We're going to identify manipulation fast. How are we going to do it? So Another few points to emphasize here as on the topic of intellectual self-defense as we're getting into the chain of responsibility is that Circuit 3 or Circuit 4 does nothing against Circuit 2. It's not like it does a little bit, or it's not like there's diminishing effects. It does 0. You're multiplying by 0 if someone is engaging with you on Circuit 2, even if it looks like Circuit 3. If someone is engaging with you in Circuit 2 and you do Circuit 3 back, you are doing 0, 0, 0 to get yourself ahead. Smart people are good at and comfortable with Circuit 3. And they think that more Circuit 3 is the best response to Circuit 2. If someone is getting manipulative, if someone is saying things that don't make very much sense, smart people typically think, I need to make more sense to make up for it. This is wrong. This is flat out wrong, and it makes you look like an idiot. Circuit 2 needs to be met with Circuit 2. Circuit 2 needs to be met with Circuit 2. Otherwise, you lose the actual interaction, because the actual interaction is a win-lose situation. You can try to make it as win-win as you want. But if the other person is making it win-lose, that overrides your attempt to make it win-win, and you now are on a win-lose interaction, and if you attempt to be reasonable, you lose by default. In the same way, a boxer would lose a match by not showing up to the fight. So, I have been saying this pretty clearly. My slide here says, more clearly said, stop being reasonable. You need to stop being reasonable. Now, I will put the emphases on, I can think of two situations where you should continue being reasonable. And that is, if you're in a physically dangerous situation, like someone's got a gun pointed to your head and they're going to shoot, if you don't play along with being reasonable, okay, fine, continue being reasonable. Or pick your battles. Is this situation even worth your time? If the tweaker at the gas station is yelling at you and trying to manipulate you, is it even worth your time and effort to respond or just fill up your gas, get in your car, and drive away? Right? Pick your battles. But at the same time, don't get pushed around. And we'll get into this more. The people who are going to push you around the most are your family and your friends and any other direct person that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. And this is, in terms of intellectual self-defense, this is so important, is that typically people think of intellectual self-defense as like this one-on-one battle, right? You're actually battling everybody who's watching. If you have any audience at all, if you're at the Thanksgiving dinner table and you're battling with the person across the table from you, everybody else is watching. Right? If you're at school, everybody else is watching. If you're at work, everybody else is watching. And they're going to blame you. If you recognize what's going on, you say, hey, there's a 3-2 slip. He's pretending to be reasonable, and he wants me to continue being reasonable. If you drop the circuit and come after the second circuit, you wipe the sophist, you wipe the floor with the sophist, and you turn around and look at the audience, they're all going to point at you and say, wow, you started that fight. You started that fight. You need to be prepared for that. And as I discussed in part one, I have found the best way to deal with that is to simply challenge the entire audience. Because if they were interested in fighting with you, they would have been the sophist in front of you to begin with. Typically, they just run away. Yeah, I think that's well enough said. If you want to hear more about that, go back and listen to part 1. Okay. So, identification versus strategy. Now, as I mentioned before, I've alluded to some strategies a little bit throughout these 3 parts, but for the most part, this entire presentation is focused on identification. And the reason being is I can describe identifying sophistry very formulaically. I can provide a symbolic tool set. I can provide a framework in order to understand this, in order to identify it. When it comes to strategy, that's a completely different conversation that cannot be fully grasped and fully understood by simply listening to somebody or reading something. That's something you have to practice. We'll talk about that more at the end of the presentation today, or the end of part 3. Now, before we can even get to strategy, you have to understand that you're being attacked first. If you don't know that you're being attacked, you will never defend yourself. It's self-evidently obvious. So that must mean that speed in identification is vital, right? I mean, just from a war perspective or a battle perspective, right? The more you know about what the enemy's going to do sooner, the more it benefits you. You can defend yourself better, right? Same thing in this situation. The faster you figure out that it's happening, the sooner you can choose to do something about it. So identification is vital. So in part one, like I said, we discussed the game board. We defined manipulation. We did not emphasize identification. In part two, we discussed identification using formal grammar and logic. Now, I gave my sped up version of how I interpret formal grammar and logic, but even with that, it's slow. It's slow. If you're spinning around trying to find the fallacy, and the sophist has already moved on, making fun of you in front of everybody, and lowering your social status and making you look like an idiot despite the fact that you have the superior argument, then you've lost time and you've been manipulated, and your actions will show that. The purpose of the chain of responsibility is to speed up that identification and to speed it up fast. Now, I will say this method will not catch everything. Part two, the line of reason, will catch everything. Formal logic will catch everything. This will not. However, in my observation, in my experience, this is kind of like the 80-20 rule. Learning 20% of the rules will allow you to play 80% of the game. All right? So don't rely on part three to catch everything. You're still going to want that foundation of part two. That's why I really recommend, if you skipped part two at some point, go back and listen to it. You're going to really want that foundation of part two. But with part three, you're just going to be in a completely different world of skill just with part three alone. Now, the topics discussed today are technically philosophy. I am going to do my best to not have to rely on philosophical terminology or there will be philosophical ideas, but my point is I want to relay them to you in a way that you don't even recognize that we're talking about philosophy. And I say this because I know, just like formal logic, I said this at the beginning of part two, just like formal logic, just saying the word philosophy can start to put people to sleep. This is exciting. You will see how exciting it is as we get into it. This is exciting, and I don't want to bore you with philosophical terminology and poor philosophical concepts. I'll be clarifying that later. Real philosophy is exciting. Incorrect philosophy is what puts you to sleep. So stick with me. Philosophy is boring like logic. I will be addressing philosophical points. I'm going to be criticizing a lot of them. But in terms of understanding the ideas I'm putting forward, I'm going to avoid philosophical terms, philosophical traditions as much as I possibly can. So stick with me. Yeah, this is the most powerful of the three parts. I've mentioned that several times now. So, just like I told the story of Edward at the table for part one, I want to tell a little bit of my story of discovery about this. So when I was in Europe, I mentioned in part one, I did this traveling stint through Europe. I had actually was gone from where I grew up from almost a year before that. I lived in Vermont for a year. I'm originally from Washington State. I moved to Vermont, stayed there for a year, and I moved to Europe. And in both times, I just bought a one-way plane ticket and left and figured it out after I got there. And I ended up staying in Europe for a little bit over 2 years. So there was about 3.5 years I was gone, and during that time is when I stumbled into formal logic, and I stumbled into the trivium. I stumbled into the books and sources that I mentioned in the prior parts, and I really started putting all this stuff together. And after 3.5 years, I came home to Washington, and I felt like I had grown and developed, and I had these great experiences that helped make me a more mature human being, and I assumed that the same thing had happened to everybody else that I knew, because that must, I got more mature over time. Here's a bad syllogism for you, right? I got more mature over time. Therefore, time must make you mature. Therefore, Everybody else must have gotten more mature over time. Wrong. Almost everybody that I remembered back at home was in the same state that I remembered leaving them as. And more importantly, they acted as if I was in the same state from when I left. To say that more specifically, all the people that manipulated me, and I got a manipulative family, man. I mean, I'm not saying that other people don't have manipulative families. From what I've interacted with other people and discussed with other people, mine is like an order of magnitude higher on the manipulation scale on my mom's side. It's unreal. So in ironic sense, my crazy manipulative family is kind of the drive that led me into figuring all this stuff out. So I come home, and I mentioned in part 1 I ended up staying with my dad, and in part 2 I actually mentioned the family farm. I actually stayed on the family farm at one point after coming back from Europe because I needed a place to stay. I was trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. I did not want to go back to working at an oil refinery, which was what I had done before all my traveling as a laboratory technician, and I didn't know what to do with myself. So I ended up staying on this family farm with my great-grandmother, my mom's grandma, right? And so I've got 4 generations here, right? I got me, my mom, my grandma, and my great-grandma. And as I started putting these ideas together, this wild, incredible manipulation that this family would do to each other. And I mean, to go from 0 to 60, shouting, screaming match over nothing in half a second was just completely normal. And I was just so blown away. I remember just being so blown away because I had formed part 1. I would relatively formed part 2, and I hadn't formed part 3 here yet. And I just remember thinking, how are these people saying this to each other with a straight face? This is so obviously manipulative. How are they saying this to each other with a straight face? And what I started to notice is that there was a pattern. There were several patterns to the manipulation, where the manipulation actually followed several of these different patterns, and I started seeing these patterns so much, I started to visualize, like coming up with little instruments that I could stick in front of a person when I suspect that they're manipulating me, and if the instrument went off, I knew that a 3-2 slip had occurred. We'll get to this much later, but for example, if someone was justifying something on their intentions, their means, or their ends, intention or ends. If someone just makes a justification on intention or makes a justification on ends, that's a form of manipulation. So if I could stick this little meter in front of them and it goes on intention or ends, I would have I'd have an indicator that I had a 3-2 slip. There it is, right? And so as I started crafting all these weird mental gizmos, I had one realization one day, is that they all connected together. And I could use them because they all connected together like a chain. I could identify the manipulation so quickly because I only needed to find one broken link in the chain in order to identify the manipulation. That's where I came up with the term, the chain of responsibility. So, in order to understand where I'm coming from in this, we got to start with an observation, because this is really the first time I got the 3 parts here, right? This is the first time I'm really bringing in responsibility into the equation. And it's actually central to understanding intellectual self-defense. So here's how I get to that. So my first observation here is that people base their actions on what they believe they are responsible for. And this really isn't that hard to figure out when you look at the meaning of responsibility, right? Responsibility literally is 2 words put together. It's your ability to respond. Well, what is your ability to respond? It's your ability to make a choice. What's your ability to make a choice? It's your free will. Your responsibility, I'm not going to say it's exactly equivalent. I'm not going to say it's congruent to free will, but they're pretty interrelated. So, if not the same thing, they might be the same thing. I'm not sure about that. But just for the sake of argument, I'll say they aren't exactly the same thing, but they're very interrelated. So, if that's true, if people base their actions on what they believe they're responsible for, what they believe that they can make a choice around, that means if I can manipulate somebody else's understanding of responsibility, I can manipulate their actions. You guys see that? If I make you believe that you are responsible for providing for your children, you need to make the action of getting a job to make money to provide for the children. If I can convince you that you're not responsible for providing for your children, what do you need to get a job for? It's a big difference. It's a big difference how the actions play out depending on what you believe you're responsible for up here. Now, I do need to give some credit, and there is someone missing off this that I'm going to mention as well. There were two distinct presentations that really, really, really helped me formulate these ideas. Both of them are available on Peace Revolution podcast, which is put together by Richard Andrew Grove. These are episodes 62 and 74. Episode 62 is The Philosophic Corruption of Physics, or it includes The Philosophic Corruptions of Physics, which is a lecture by David Harriman that looks at how largely Romantic era German philosophy ideas infected physics and what it looks like, why science is lacking in so much sense today, because this continues. Excellent. Highly recommend. The second one is included in episode 74 of Peace Revolution podcast, which is Mark Passio's New Age Bullshit and the Suppression of the Sacred Masculine. Without these two, I don't know if I ever would have put these ideas together. Highly recommend checking them out after listening to this. Very, very important. The third one that I want to put on here, that should be on here, is Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. Oh, I guess he just calls it Free Domain now. And I don't have any particular episode of his to point to other than I think everything I've discussed here, Stefan Molyneux knows it very, very, very well. I'm just framing it in a way that he hasn't framed it before. It was very useful for me to watch him put what I would call intellectual self-defense in play when people would call him and try to manipulate him, and he was just this kung fu master. So I mean, it was great to listen to him and watch actual live examples of him applying this, and that really helped me understand how to apply this as well. And then I have some honorable mentions here. If you're one of these people, you probably know who you are. Cody, Max, Jeremy, Eric, and Russ. Thank you for allowing me to bounce these ideas off of you to help me develop them in a way that were coherent. All right, there's my credit. Let's move forward. Okay. Responsibility is self-evident. And I say this at the beginning so I don't have some whiny person going, well, how do you prove that there's such a thing as responsibility? I don't need to. Here's why. Responsibility does not require philosophical proof because it's self-evident. We can observe it. All right? If you had a problem with me saying this and then you email me and complain about it, how did you know to email me? Because you recognize that I was the person responsible for saying it, right? If someone's mugging you, and you conceal carry, are you going to turn around and shoot the person next to him? No, because you instinctively understand that the person mugging you is the person responsible for the action, right? A corollary to this would be comparing the theory of gravity to observing that things fall. Humans, from time immemorial, have been able to observe that things fall. We still argue about the nature and the reality of the theory of gravity today, right? The theory of gravity is really conceptual and, okay, is it a force? Is it just distortions in space-time? How do we prove it? Yes, that needs proof. Things fall, we can observe it. If someone's arguing with me that things fall, I don't know, they're standing on the ground. So humans instinctively understand responsibility and the fact that it is self-evident. And as an example, kind of a primer leading into this, is that because we instinctively understand it, people instinctively understand how to manipulate it. Compare these 4 sentences. 1, I need to figure this out. 2, you need to figure this out. 3, we need to figure this out. 4, someone needs to figure this out. In each of these cases, I don't think it's a large jump to see that if I did something and it's my fault and I say, you need to figure this out, I'm putting the onus of responsibility on you, which means I expect the action to fix it to come from you. Now, that's obvious. It gets a little bit more insidious if I do something, it's 100% my fault, and I say, we need to figure this out. Right? There's always 2 sides to a problem. So both sides of the problem should try to figure it out. Well, if you accept that premise, maybe you only accepted half of the responsibility, but you should have had 0. See how this manipulation happens? And then someone needs to figure this out. I'll just describe this with an example. So, I've got some distant in-law relative on my wife's side that was from New Jersey, ended up moving to Seattle, which is near where I live. And we met because, hey, husband, I've got some distant relative who's here that I've never met before. Let's meet them. Okay, cool. And so I met them, and he gets to Seattle, and he ends up getting a job working in, I don't know the name of the place, but it was something to do with helping people get benefits, government benefits, right? And one of those things was helping people with their rent in Seattle. And when I first meet him, he's like, I got this job, and I used to be a lot more liberal, but after having this job and getting older, I'm becoming much, much more conservative. And he gave this example. He said, every month, working at this place, we got this guy, he walks into the office screaming, somebody's got to pay my rent, or I'm going to get kicked out of my house. Yeah, somebody. I mean, do I even have to explain that one? I'm not responsible for paying my rent. Somebody else is, or I'm going to get kicked out of my house. You're going to be responsible. Somebody else is going to be responsible for me getting kicked out of my house because somebody needs to pay my rent. I think you get what I'm getting at here. So, on top of this, there is also some sort of law of conservation of responsibility. In physics and science, you talk about the law of conservation of energy. I'm obviously making a bridge to that, right? A law of conservation of responsibility, where responsibility can be created. Like, I could do new actions that make me responsible for stuff, but it can't be destroyed. What do I mean by that? I mean you cannot remove yourself from your personal responsibility. Go back to the guy in Seattle demanding that somebody pays his rent. There is somebody responsible for paying that rent. It's him. But he can't destroy that responsibility, right? If that rent doesn't get paid, he can get kicked out of his house. So he could try to push it around, but it can't be destroyed. And fundamentally, here's another premise. You cannot get rid of your own personal responsibility. It cannot be done. It's a part of you as much as your arm, as much as your brain, as much as your eyes. It's a part of you. You cannot get rid of it. But you can convince others not to hold you responsible. Someone's got to pay my rent is the example of this. The responsibility's there. He could try to hold somebody else responsible for it, and we live in a world where success. He's got someone else who could pay for his rent. Me, because I get taxed for it, right? Which is another example of these concepts have real, huge, dire consequences and results if they're ignored. And me being taxed is a minor one, as we'll see as we move forward. So with the conservation of responsibility, the idea that you cannot remove yourself from your own responsibility, there's 2 ways to look at this. There's 2 ways to interpret this reality of the universe. The first is that the responsibility is a form of slavery and it inhibits free will. The fact that I am responsible for my actions and I could face negative consequences for doing certain things. That's something that's holding me back. That's like a slavery condition of the universe, and that should be resisted. An easy way to refer to this is called evil. Somebody who does that is evil, or someone who believes in that and acts on it is evil. Or you can recognize that responsibility is part of the framework and is a boundary condition of the universe that allows us to exist with real consequences of our choices, and is required for expression of true free will. This is the good interpretation of it. And I want to emphasize what I mean here is similar to, I'm in a room right now. There's a floor and there's walls. The floor is preventing me from going straight down, and the walls are preventing me from going in the direction that the walls are in. So from a certain perspective, they are limiting to me. I am limited from going through the wall in that direction. However, because there's a room here with electricity and floors and walls and lights and protection from the elements and heat, I have the opportunity to do something within that room, within this building, that I couldn't do if this building wasn't here. Does that make sense? So having limits actually provides opportunity for more free will. Having limits actually provides the opportunity for more freedom of action. Let that sink in as we move forward. And even if you believe in number one, that responsibility is a form of slavery and it inhibits free will, you're still responsible for your actions. Now, we talked about sophistry in parts 1 and parts 2. We talked about the 3-2 slip in parts 1 and parts 2. So now the purpose of sophistry is to manipulate others. Well, I just made the point that incorrectly identifying responsibility also manipulates others. What this means is that incorrectly identifying responsibility is sophistry. Incorrectly identifying responsibility is sophistry, and I suspect, I will posit, that sophistry fundamentally, there's literally no other option. The purpose of sophistry is to manipulate the understanding of responsibility of others. That's it. There is nothing else that sophistry does. The thing that's being manipulated is the other person's understanding of their responsibility for something. Or, I should say, also includes, if I'm trying to manipulate you because I'm responsible for something, I'm trying to convince you to not hold me responsible for something that I'm responsible for, right? Often trying to shove it onto you. And so sophistry, if sophistry occurs, we know there's a fallacy, we know there's the 3-2 slip somewhere. If responsibility is incorrectly identified, that also means that there's a fallacy or a 3-2 slip somewhere. Okay? You guys might start seeing where I'm going with this, where one of the reasons that this is going to be faster than traditional logic is we don't have to spot the fallacy. Let's keep going. So, when I said that my crazy family followed some basic patterns of manipulation when I was figuring this out, I was able to break things down into 5 basic patterns. And because sophists are typically basic, they're typically using these 5 different patterns of bullshit. Each pattern attacks a concept of responsibility. And what we're going to be doing is looking over these 5 different concepts. Now, before I get in there, I do want to have a disclaimer. I made this up. This is my creation. Now, the ideas that I'm going to be, the individual patterns and ideas that I'm going to be discussing are not my creation, but the putting them in this order and grouping them the way that I'm grouping them, I did this. This is all mine. If you think it could be done better, fine. This is a prototype. Make it better. If you think this isn't including something that it could include, I'm not sure what it could be, but if you think this is including something that it could include, see if you can make it better, see if you can make it more clear. However, what I got right now, it works pretty darn well, and you're going to find out. Okay, so this is how this presentation is going to go. This is what the format's going to look like. We're going to analyze one principle at a time. Oh, and I wanted to say this. So I've got this image here. This is particularly useful if you're listening to audio only. I've got this image here of a silhouette of a man and a woman and a chain with 5 links connecting them to the responsibility. This is similar to the shackled foot that I had in the prior slide. And because we are chained to our responsibility, what the sophist tries to do is to break a link in order to have somebody not hold them accountable for the responsibility. So each of these links is going to contain a principle, and we're going to be looking at each one at a time. So we'll be analyzing one principle or link at a time, and we're going to be looking at what is the principle, why that principle is necessary for responsibility to exist. Because this, I'm kind of getting philosophical here, but at the same time, not talking philosophy. People who know philosophy should understand what I'm talking about here. But if a person posits a principle, and that principle is not consistent with the proper identification of responsibility, or that principle would lead to the non-existence of responsibility, then that principle is invalid. Let me say that again the other way. In order for a principle to be valid, it must be, how do I want to say it? It must agree that responsibility A even exists, and the principle must align with properly identifying that responsibility. Well, it might be a little bit hard to understand in a second, but it'll make sense. Stay with me. Then we will look at how can this link be broken? How could somebody attempt to remove themselves from the responsibility by breaking this one link so you do not hold them accountable for their personal actions, for their personal responsibility? And then we'll look at some examples. Now, this might be confusing at first. I have had the feedback when I've talked to people about this in private that at first they're not entirely sure what I'm talking about, and then all of a sudden it clicks. Now, I think I've improved it since then, and I've gotten a little bit better at presenting it. But if we're going through this a little ways and you're kind of like, I'm not sure what you're talking about, Dylan, stick with me because it'll be like a zipper, zip, where it all comes together. Here we go. So here's the chain of responsibility. We're going to be looking at link 1, which, sorry for my first philosophy term here. It's so useful. I had to use it, which is the law of identity, or what we can call existence. So what is it? What is this principle? What is this link? This link is simply saying that objective reality exists. In philosophic circles, this is referred to as the law of identity. To put it in layman's terms, it sounds weird, but you'll still see why this is important. You could simply say, things are what they are, or that things are equal to themselves. Now, why must this be true? Why must objective reality be true in order for responsibility to exist? Well, because responsibility is a subcategory of reality. Right? Is that clear? If there was no reality, there would also not be any responsibility, because that's part of reality. So if there were no such thing as reality, there would be no such thing as responsibility, which means no one could be responsible for anything. No one could be responsible for anything. Now, for this first link, you're probably thinking, okay, duh, so what? You will be shocked once I make clear to you how much people try to break this link all the time. All the time. Okay? The way that you break this first link is to deny objective reality. Let's look at some examples. There's your truth and my truth. Perception is reality. There's no such thing as truth. Let's agree to disagree. Now, before I got 2 more examples to come after this. Let's look at these real quick. All right? So, you listening to this must have heard all 4 of these things at some point. When someone is saying there's your truth and my truth, to say the truth is the same thing as saying objective reality. If there's your truth and my truth, well, that means there is no objective reality. So if they say that, they're breaking the link, right? They're denying objective reality by saying your truth and my truth. And they're doing it because if we're having a discussion, I'm trying to prove a point, and I say, hey, here's the point, and there it is. Here's for you to respond to it. And they go, oh, well, there's your truth and my truth. What they're doing is they're trying to make themselves not responsible for understanding the clear point that you just made. And they're doing it by denying objective reality. Perception is reality. Same thing. I won't dive into the whole story and example, but there's a very clear time in my life I had an argument with somebody about something where I said, hey, here's the issue that I have. This thing happened. And he goes, oh, yeah, well, so you perceive that that's what happened. And I said, no. That's what happened. Excuse me. And he put his foot down. No, you perceive that that's how it happened. No, that's how it happened. You perceive that that's how it happened. We went back and forth. It actually turned into a shouting match. But as I discussed in part 2, this thing about how a sophist will take one little word and try to make a big thing look small, if whatever I describe as a situation, if that's just my perception, regardless of what happens in this interaction between me and this other guy, if at any point I'm making a better argument, he can always just go back and go, well, that's just your perception. No such thing as objective reality. You're just, you've got some sensations in your brain that you think are coming through your eyes, and that's just your perception of what's going on. So because it's just your perception, I don't have to take it seriously. Right? There's no such thing as truth. Well, this is just another version on your truth and my truth. This is literally saying there's no such thing as objective reality. Let's agree to disagree. Now, there may be times when we could agree to disagree where this is valid. Like, I think that vanilla ice cream is the best and you think chocolate ice cream is the best, and we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that point. Okay. Yeah, that works. Let's switch this to, okay, I'm in your house and I see something valuable and I pick it up and I take it and you go, hey, wait a minute, that's mine. And I go, no, I think it's mine. And you say, no, it's in my house. I bought it. I remember. I got the receipt. It's mine. Well, let's just agree to disagree. What does it mean? Right? What does it mean? It means I don't have to listen to you, is what it means. I'm denying that there is an objective reality that we're referring to, and the reality is I am literally stealing something from you right now. And if we don't resolve this, I am going to continue to steal it. It will be stolen from, and by me saying, let's agree to disagree, I'm trying to get you to shut up and let me keep stealing it. I'm trying to get you to shut up and let me to continue manipulate you. You follow me here? When I was in Europe, this is at the vague beginnings of me putting these ideas together. I remember I was at a party in Austria, in Vienna, and I'm talking to this guy, and we got on the issue of gun control. And of course, we all know in Europe that a heavily gun-controlled area, right? And if you're listening to this, you're probably on the Second Amendment rocks side. If you're not, then let's have a discussion and see where we find some 3-2 slips. But we were having this discussion, and I just laid him out, right? I mean, someone who understands the right to bear arms, someone who understands the right to self-defense, like the arguments are so clear and the facts support the arguments so clearly, there is no defense against gun control. Right, or there is no defense of agreeing with the concept of gun control. It's just asinine. And so I laid him out with these arguments. And after I had laid him out, I could see on his face that he was laid out. And then he just leans back and goes, well, we in Europe are of a different opinion. Now, at the time, that stumped me. And I mean, I feel stupid saying this because it's just so obviously dumb what he did. But your opinion doesn't matter, man. I'm not talking about your opinion. I'm not talking about whether you like ice cream or not. I'm talking about the reality of how to organize socially and the effects of how we organize and what that means for freedom and moral responsibility. And I could see on his face that he understood it and he didn't have an argument against it. And in order to shield himself from that understanding, which he would then become responsible for, different opinion. Breaks link 1. You're denying objective reality when somebody does that. Now, this is a made-up example, but I think it really, really elucidates the point. So imagine someone goes to a grocery store and they buy a bunch of items and they go to the checkout counter and they're actually checking out by a real human being. Man, I feel old now saying that. So you're checking out with a real human being and she rings everything up and she goes, okay, yeah, that'll be $82.17. Could you ever imagine somebody going, no, wait a minute. That's just your opinion. My opinion is that it's $7.12. And you need to respect my opinion just as much as I respect your opinion. Would anybody ever do that? You might think yes, but I'm going to address that in a second. Would any reasonable, remotely, even non-reasonable person, any sophist even try that? No, because they know it's not going to work. They know it's bullshit. No one believes this stuff. No one actually believes that objective reality doesn't exist because you can tell by their actions. They would not do this to a clerk at a store. Oh, it's just your opinion that it costs that much money. It's my opinion that it costs this much money. But they'll do it to you. And then act like, oh, you're, that's just your opinion. You're getting all upset about my opinion. Look what an asshole you are. They'll do it to you and expect you to buy it, but they won't do it when it actually matters because they know it's bullshit. The only people who actually believe this are literally insane. I mean, like lithium straitjacket padded room insane. I had a friend who actually went insane, and I remember listening to her talk about helicopters following her and talking with Bigfoot in the forest and flowers screaming at her and all this stuff, and I could tell she actually believed it because she was insane. She was following up on her understanding of her subjective reality with her actual actions. She really believed it. Unless you're actually insane, clinically insane, people don't believe this. It's bullshit. Don't fall for it. Now, remember in part 2 where I said we're going to come back to this in part 3? Here's that slide from part 2 when we discussed grammar. That grammar is a science of the second imposition. Grammar is how we identify and relate objective concepts with subjective labels, and that this in itself was the first line of defense. This is link 1. This is the starting point of intellectual self-defense, is that speech itself implies reality. Speech itself implies reality. If there's no such thing as reality, you have nothing to talk to me about. Because there is an objective component and a subjective component of a word, and if you're using a subjective sound to communicate something, you are attempting to communicate something objective. So anybody who tries to tell you that objective reality, there's no such thing as objective reality, they are self-defeating. They are self-defeating because they are using words to convince you of something objective. Let's look at an example from Tim Pool. I call this the wind-up. So this is back right after 2020 when all the fiasco about the 2020 election was happening and the censorship really started ramping up. And people were getting banned off of Twitter and YouTube, whatever. And there was a couple companies that came up and said, hey, we're the alternative to this other social media. And Tim Pool started interviewing a few of them. And one of them he interviewed was Getter's Jason Miller. I don't remember if he was like the owner or the CEO, but he's the boss basically at this point. And when it comes to breaking link 1, something I've noticed is that people will wind it up. Like, I mean, if I go back to these examples that I was discussing, I mean, I guess sometimes they'll just straight up and tell you these things without a wind up. But occasionally you'll get this thing where, I mean, like when somebody does this with their fist to joke up like they're going to wind up and hit you, they do this long wind up to distract you from the fact that they're basically going to hit you with, well, that's just your opinion, man. Let's watch that in action.
Well, let me just ask you, have you ever seen or heard anything from Nick Fuentes that was white nationalism? Like, have you directly heard from him specifically?
I have a limited volume of things that I've seen from Nick Fuentes. Obviously, I've seen him use some words that would not be allowed on our platform. some racial slurs that would not be allowed on our platform. But the point is, even if it wasn't Fuentes, anyone else who came in and made a similar comment or was trying to organize or pull people together who were in a group that's identified as
who identified them as white nationalists?
As far as on the Groyper side?
Look, I got to be completely honest. I don't know a whole lot about what Groypers are.
And I'll admit it's not a community I've spent a ton of time that I've seen, but I've seen a number of writings and things where that's how that group has been defined.
So you're saying because the media has called them white nationalists, you've banned Nick Fuentes?
No, I'd say that, say for the fact that if you're out there trying to organize and collect with a group, that I don't even think it's just the media. I mean, look at many people who've self-ID'd as being part of that group or part of that ideology.
Bro, I don't think you got an argument here, man. This sounds like complete bullshit. I don't think you know anything about what this group is. I got to be honest, I don't either. But this is just talking in circles. I've not listened to Nick Fuentes. I don't know a lot about him. I know that he's been banned across the board. I know that he's had trouble getting on planes. I can hear what his fans are saying, but I don't know. Maybe they're just lying because they want to support him. I really don't know. So it's really difficult for me to be like, to understand exactly what he did wrong. The issue for me is when I ask you, you don't seem to know either.
No, I think
all you said is that he posted, who else here is a Groyper? I'm like, well, what's a Groyper? You don't know. You just read it in the media and they said something bad about him. Is that justification? For me, I got no idea. Like, I thought you were going to come on and be like, look, Nick Fuentes said this and he said this, and you got to understand we did research on Groypers and found this, but you don't even have that.
Look, and I'm going to say on this that you're not going to make everyone happy when you're running a social media platform, and people are going to have different opinions. So your opinion might be that, hey, that's BS. There are other people who are going to say, look, these guys are making sure that this is a safe platform and we respect what they're doing. They're giving us that ability to have that political free speech. And look, we might just disagree on this one.
I just feel like, look, I can, I'll stress it again. I do believe that Getter is likely to censor.
Okay, that's enough. So that's just your opinion, man. Let's just agree to disagree. Did you see that wind-up? So, again, there's some serious, real consequences to these ideas. And so Tim Pool here is trying to discuss, a core tenet of the philosophy of this country, which is this concept of free speech. And that someone has had their free speech removed. This is not saying any opinion one way or the other on Nick Fuentes, but he did have his he was banned all over the place. Tim Pool's bringing that up. And brings up that you, Jason Miller, do not appear to have a good reason for censoring this guy. And what can Jason Miller say? Well, that's just your opinion, man. Let's just agree to disagree. Well, similar to how I discussed, okay, let's take something's valuable from somebody's house when they question you on it, just say, let's just agree to disagree. The result is that you continue stealing the thing. The result here is that censorship is still occurring. Freedom of speech is still getting attacked. Let's just agree to disagree. No, that's breaking link one. Broken. Another important thing about link one, before we move on to link two, is that we talked about, how to break link one is to deny objective reality. This includes objective morality, okay? And the reason that objective morality is also a part of objective reality is because nobody actually believes that it isn't. There is nobody who actually, just like there's nobody who actually believes in subjective reality, except it's insane people. There are also nobody actually believes in subjective morality, except again maybe insane people. How do you know? Oops. This is really easy to prove, right? If you ever get in a conversation and someone starts bringing up how morals are subjective, go right for the big one. Just say, okay, so are you telling me that pedophilia is just the fact that pedophilia is bad is subjective, and watch them squirm. If for some reason they are dishonest enough to be like, oh yeah, it's just totally moral and there's minor loving individual, whatever stupid fucking language they're using to describe pedophiles these days, is be like, okay, so if somebody molests you, if somebody does harm to you, if somebody tortures you, and you don't like that, that's also subjective. Some phrases that will indicate this of someone breaking the first link of denying objective morality. There's no such thing as right and wrong, or there's no such thing as a negative experience. This is a very new agey concept. No such thing as a negative experience, which means I could do bad things to you, and that's just as good. I could do horrible things. I could torture you. I can kill you. I can murder you, steal from you, whatever. And that's exactly the same thing as doing something good. Complete bullshit. Here's some examples of some infected ideas. So I said I am going to be talking about philosophy, but I'm going to be bringing up the idea and using it so we can see philosophy and ideas that are bad. And we know that they're bad because we see that they break the link. David Hume, famous 18th century philosopher, English philosopher, basically a total subjectivist, comes to the idea that one opinion is no more probable or likely than another. This is not philosophy. This is crap. Immanuel Kant. We are only aware of sensations and can never use them to say anything about reality. Again, this is not philosophy. This is crap. Einstein. Oh, no one's going there. Perception shapes reality. The same object can have different lengths and masses for different observers. Now, I do want to be careful here. I'm not criticizing like the math of relativity here. I'm criticizing the interpretation of relativity. In that, okay, if we start reaching the speed of light and we start to observe the fact that things appear to get smaller, are they actually getting smaller or are they appearing to get smaller? And if velocity also appears to become relative at those speeds, well, velocity is just a component of momentum. Momentum is velocity times mass. And now because when you multiply two things, it doesn't matter what order that you multiply them, Einstein then turns around and says there's such a thing as relativistic mass, so that the camera that I'm looking at, because I'm moving slowly, has a certain mass, but if you're moving by fast, the camera has a different mass for you. That doesn't make any sense. The camera has the same mass. The appearance can change. That's my criticism. And if you listen to the philosophic corruption of physics, you'll see that all these ideas that are going to be talking from about scientists actually derive in figures like Hume and Immanuel Kant. Heisenberg. This is the guy that came up with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Atoms don't exist until we observe them. Crap. Breaks the first rule, or for the first link. Other examples of ideas that break the first link: relativism, positivism, instrumentalism, Platonism, aspects of Platonism, many aspects of romantic German philosophy, solipsism, relativity, quantum mechanics, New Age teachings. Now, again, with the relativity and quantum mechanics, I'm not criticizing the math, I'm criticizing the interpretation. I'm not going to go into these one by one, but I mean, here's an exercise for you. Go look up the definitions of these things and apply the first link of what I just said to them, and you can see immediately that they are not valid ideas because they break the first link of the chain of responsibility. So anytime anybody even comes to you with these ideas, you can know from the get-go that they're crap. They're bullshit. So let's move on to link 2. This is causality, or cause and effect. So what is it? This is to say, objective things have real properties that are consistent everywhere. Or better said, things do what they do. We started out, things are what they are, and it follows that if things are what they are, those things have real properties. That means things do what they do. Why must this be true for responsibility to exist? Well, I mean, it's almost as obvious as link 1. Responsibility is a result of a cause, right? If I'm responsible for something, it's because I did something to begin with. Like the theoretical person emailing me saying that there's no such thing as cause and effect. Why did you email me? How do you know the sound waves that went into your ear were caused by me if there's no such thing as cause and effect? So if there were no such thing as cause and effect, that means no one could do anything to anybody else, which means nobody could be responsible for anything, just like link 1. Now, unlike link 1, there's 3 ways to break the second link. The first is you can outright deny the existence of cause and effect. The second is you can confuse cause and effect. Say the effect is the cause and the cause is the effect. Or you can relate an effect to the wrong cause. Okay? So here's some examples. I believe. This is one of the examples I had with my great-grandmother on some things that we disagreed about, where I said, hey, the reason I'm doing this is because of this. Well, I feel that that's not the case. And I'm like, this is one of my, like, I just laid out a clear argument, and your response is, I feel that that's not the case. And when I repeated the argument, she just got louder. I feel that that's not the case. And I'm like, your feelings do not pertain to anything. It's not part of the equation here of what's being discussed, right? The cause of your feeling has no effect on the thing that we're talking about. Well, you can't change the past to anybody who's gone to their abusive parents and tried to address it, and they want to, shift the conversation and go, you can't change the past. Correct. I can't change the past, Mom. I can't change the past, Dad. I'm talking about right now, and whether or not anybody could change the past has no bearing on what we're talking about. There's no cause and effect here. Oh, that's offensive. What does that have to do with anything? Oh, I got this one before. Oh, you're very young. You need to respect the wisdom of your elders. Now, something like this is very cleverly disguised because there are times when you should respect the wisdom of your elders. However, if I lay out a good argument and you can't respond to it, and this is the thing that you say, well, there doesn't appear to be any wisdom of my elders here because this is the bullshit that you're responding with. There's no connection with what I'm saying. Are you going to worry me to death? Right? That thing that you're doing, I don't like it. So are you going to worry me to death? No, you're worrying yourself to death. You're the cause that's creating the effect, not me. And then, this one's a joke, but we're all familiar with this. The beatings will continue until morale improves. This is obviously switching cause and effect. Often, these are non sequitur or strawman fallacies. This is a comic from SMBC Comics that I think just nails what I'm trying to put forward here. So if you're on the or listening to audio only on this, I got a comic here. There's 4 different cells. And at the top, it says exegology. Makes up a word. It's a noun. A statement whose converse is its own explanation. And the first one is a man saying, politicians never do what my group wants, so I never vote. The second one is a not well-dressed, unkempt man. Girls aren't interested in me, so I don't see why I should care about hygiene. Third, a woman on a computer. I'm terrible at this, so I'm not even going to try. Fourth, a man eating bacon salad sandwiches. Life is short, so I'm going to be eating as many bacon salad sandwiches as possible. Each one of these confuses cause and effect, right? For the first guy, the answer is because he never votes, politicians never in my group never do what I want. Or excuse me, politicians never do what my group wants. And I don't want to get into this whole thing about voting, but what the person is doing, let's just, take voting for granted as something that you should be engaging in. If your excuse for voting is that a politician never does what you want, well, that you're flipping cause and effect and you're removing the responsibility from yourself from having to act. Follow me? I mean, this is what the whole centrist idea is about, right? I don't have an opinion on what's going on, so I'm morally superior. Well, what you're trying to say is I don't want anybody holding me responsible for my actions. That's what that is. And if other people are starting to form these ideas on specific things, which say, hey, because this is what's going on, we have to do X, Y, and Z. And I say, oh, whoa, wait a minute, I don't have any opinions. That means there is no X, Y, and Z or A, B, and C that I ever have to do. I don't have any opinions. So let's look at another video here. I'm sure almost everybody is familiar with this excerpt of Jordan Peterson being interviewed by Kathy Newman and the so what you're saying is, and this isn't the full interview, this is just the compilation of her repeating that. So if you haven't seen it, let's go. If you have, it'll be a good refresher. Here we go.
Jordan Peterson, you're just saying that's the way it is.
Well, I'm not saying anything. It's just an observation that that's the way it is. and that
So
you
you're
can
saying
rely on.
women have some sort of duty to sort of help fix the crisis of masculinity?
It depends on what they want.
So you're
if you
saying
want
women
domination,
want to dominate, is that what you're saying?
no, I'd say women who have had their relationships impaired, their relationships with men impaired, and who are afraid of such relationships will settle for a weak partner because they can dominate them.
Do you
It
think
does
that's
no
what a
one
lot of
any
women are
good.
doing?
I think there's a substantial minority of women who do that.
Right, so you're saying you've done your research and women are unhappy dominating men.
I didn't say they were unhappy dominating men. I said it was a bad long-term solution.
But you're saying basically it doesn't matter if women aren't getting to the top because that's what's skewing that gender pay gap, isn't it? You're saying, well, that's just a fact of
No,
life.
it's saying
Women
it
aren't
doesn't
necessarily
matter.
going to get to the top.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't matter either.
You're saying
I'm
it's a
saying
fact
there are
of life.
multiple reasons for it.
So you were saying that by and large, women are too agreeable to get the pay rises they deserve.
No, I'm saying that that's one component of a multivariate equation that predicts salary.
I mean, the pay gap between men and
Okay, so this goes on. If you've never seen it before, you can go back and find this this interview. And it's just the same thing over and over again, where Jordan Peterson will say something, and this woman, Kathy Newman, will say something completely different and attempt to link them by saying, so what you're saying is. 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 Okay, you said something. I'm going to say something completely different, but I'm going to put it in your mouth by saying, so what you're saying is. This is a perfect example of breaking the second link. Yeah, what I said versus what you said has no causal link. Second link broken. Here are a few more examples. If you resist something, you make it stronger. Right? What you resist persists. This is a new age idea. No, this is confusing cause and effect. What you resist makes it weaker. Quantum theory. Reality is just a bunch of statistical probabilities, not real entities that exhibit real properties. I mean, if you dive into the interpretation of quantum theory, this is the real stuff that they say, and the real stuff that these in quote scientists believe is that there's nothing real actually happening. We just use statistical probabilities, and that's the only thing that's going on. So, in terms of some ideas or some examples of infected ideas, are very similar to link one. Like I said, quantum theory. It's impossible to discuss anything that the atom or its parts are doing only about statistical probabilities. And modern science in general says something similar. There is only probability and chance, and things become what they are when we observe them. And in terms of philosophy, all the examples that I gave from the link one, they're the same examples here. These relativism, positivism, so on, they all break link two just as much as they break link one. And because they're so similar, links one and link two, I do want to address that briefly, which is that they're kind of the same thing. If things exist, well, existence implies that those things that exist are doing something, which implies cause and effect. Right? You really can't remove one from the other. The reason I've broken it down the way that I have is, first off, philosophers tend to separate these two things. And people, in terms of everyday discussions or everyday interactions, they break these different links in different ways. So I think it is useful to look at these as two different patterns that can be attacked when we're looking for people who are attempting to push off being held accountable from their own responsibility. Okay. Let's move on to link three. This is perception. So we've talked about the objective universe. Now we're talking about how that objective universe, our knowledge of that objective universe, gets into our minds. And also said evidence and reason. So this is the most complicated and difficult to explain of the 5 links, and probably has the highest concentration of philosophy. I'm sorry about that. I have gone backwards and forwards, doing my best to try to figure out how to simplify this. I thought about actually breaking it into 2 links, where evidence is one link and reason is another, but they're so intertwined, I kept them together, and I think you'll see why. This link can go by many, 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 many names. We can say evidence and reason. We can say knowledge and understanding. We can say grammar and logic. If you listen to part 2 All these should sound very familiar. From a philosophic perspective, we could say primacy of existence versus primacy of consciousness. Now, what is it here? Basically, if things are what they are, link 1, which means things do what they do, link 2, that means there are things for us to know. We can know objective reality, and then once we know it, we can understand it. We could use reason to make predictions about objective reality, right? The understanding, like I talked about both in section 1, part 1 and part 2, is the extraction from the individual knowledge that we observe, that we directly observe. So yeah, like I said, there are things to know and things to understand based on the fact that things are what they are, they do what they do. Now, what's really important here is that while knowledge and understanding, or evidence and reason, are both vitally important, one trumps the other. Evidence trumps reason. If you ever have an observation and you compare that with your understanding, if the observation contradicts understanding, observation wins. Evidence beats reason. It's a very important part of this. And I think this helps me understand this a little bit, is that there's an occult meaning of the word knowledge, and it means union. And to think about this in the way that the Old Testament uses the word knowledge in terms of a husband and a wife. Adam knew his wife Eve. Abraham knew his wife. Noah knew his wife. That's how the Bible is referring to sexual intercourse. And when you understand that the word means union, well, that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, if we take the word back to the way that we use it, knowledge, I know what's going on. Knowledge is the union between objective reality and what's going on in our minds. And I've brought back the prism here. I use this as a symbol in part 2 for the line of reason. I think it's also an apt symbol here because the spot where the white light exactly begins to refract into the rainbow is the union. That's the connection between the outside world and the interior mind. And I do want to make a point of clarity as we're going into this link. I am not referring to the proper usage of evidence and reason. We talked about that in part 2. I'm talking about the existence of evidence and reason. You'll see what I mean in a second. So when we went, I'm going to go through this real quick. We hit this in part 1. We hit this in detail in part 2, where we've got this syllogism: Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. I pointed out that this is the fundamental unit of logic, and that the first 2 sentences are the observation. The third sentence is the extracted understanding that we get from the 2 observations by being able to connect them with a common term. This is just me showing you, again, what is evidence and what is reason, or what is knowledge and what is understanding. What is grammar and what is logic. This syllogism, again, points it out perfectly. Now, why must this be true? And again, this is that we can know things and we can understand the things that we know, and that any evidence that we ever receive that contradicts any reasoning that we have, the evidence must win. Why must this be true for responsibility to exist? First, if knowledge didn't exist, if there was no way for us to know anything, then we would not be able to know how anybody was responsible for anything. Duh. I mean, it's just self-explanatory. If understanding didn't exist, we could never connect the ideas in order to extract who is responsible, because responsibility isn't a physical phenomenon that we can observe, right? It's an abstract concept. So if I punch you in the nose and then you get a bloody nose, well, if there's no such thing as understanding, you can't extrapolate that I'm the person who gave you the bloody nose. You see what I'm saying? That's part of the understanding from... Or that's part of the importance of understanding for us to recognize and identify responsibility. Then third, if understanding were to trump knowledge, if I could say my reasoning beats out that evidence, well, then it's just a matter of mental gymnastics to get out of any responsibility. right? Oh yeah, you claimed that fact, but that fact contradicts, this well-founded theory. So I'm not responsible for understanding or whatever just happened here because I can dance around it with my reasoning. And this ultimately leads to claims of omniscience, right? Because if someone could just, reason around everything, that means they know everything. They know everything all the time. They don't have to rely on evidence at all because reason trumps evidence. If reason trumps evidence. So how do you break link 3? The first thing you can do is you could put reason before evidence. I think this is the most common way that people break this link. The second is you could deny the existence of knowledge. This is a little bit more rare, but if you get into any new agey circles, you're going to be hearing this sort of thing all the time. The third is that you can deny the existence of understanding. Now, this one's really rare. And it's so rare that outside of like deep, dark philosophical circles, I've never heard this. Like the only reason I even brought this up is listening to the philosophic corruption of physics and having the breakdown of how Immanuel Kant addressed these certain things. I've been giving these examples of how people always have use these little quips in order to attack these certain links to get themselves out of responsibility. I don't have a single quip of somebody attacking the existence of understanding. And so I just leave it here for completeness and letting you know you're likely not going to run into this unless you get into some high-level ivory tower academic philosophy talk. As I pointed out, number one will lead to claims of omniscience. And here's one example. We're going to get into more. Man-made CO2-induced climate change is real, regardless of any scientific evidence. Right? Scientists agree. And because the science says that this is what's happening, whatever facts that we bring to the table, well, that's not relevant because we already know that the science says this is happening. I mean, this is going to go on YouTube. I'm not going to say anything about the recent medical BS that's happened within the last few years, but I think you know what I was going to get at if you're even interested in listening to this in the first place. So I just self-censored. Here are a few more examples. The truth cannot be known. I'm wise because I know nothing. There's no way you could really know anything. And that can't be true because it contradicts my theory. Now, hold on, let me get back to that one. So all these three are about denying the existence of knowledge. Things cannot be known. Things cannot be known. And if that's true, then no one could be, I guess people could be responsible for stuff, but we can never figure it out, right? The truth cannot be known. And again, this is a sort of thing where if you want to have a discussion with somebody about what they did or what they're responsible for, and all they could say is the truth cannot be known, what they're doing is they're trying to put a shield up against the responsibility so they're not held accountable for what they're actually responsible for, which is a 3-2 slip. They're manipulating you. So this last one, this is putting the reason before evidence. And I'm going to see how many feathers I can ruffle with this. So that can't be true because it contradicts my theory. I have a problem with Ludwig von Mises' money regression theorem. Actually, I have more than one problem. But the first problem is the fact that he calls it a theorem. Theorems exist, or I should say, theorems don't even exist in hard sciences. We talk about the theory of gravity. We talk about the theory of electromagnetism. We talk about quantum theory, atomic theory, right? Because even though we have so much evidence supporting the theories that we have about these things, fundamentally, from a scientific view, we understand that new evidence can come that contradicts the old theory, and we have to improve the theory for a better understanding. A theorem is only in the realm of mathematics, where you create a world where you define the parameters and say, okay, within this world where I have defined the parameters, basically as God over this world, right? If X, Y, and Z happens within this area where I define the parameters, this has to happen. That's a theorem. It must be true by definition. So now, if we go all the way to economics, which is a social science, and start throwing the word theorem around, that's some gall, man. That's some gall. And the fact that they call it a theorem, I disagree with it. The theorem, the Mises money regression theorem, comes from the barter theory of money. If you listen to any of our my shows on economics, you'll know I do not agree with the barter theory of money. I believe in the credit theory of money and the state theory of money, and that almost all evidence, there's like one piece of evidence that supports the barter theory of money. Everything else supports the credit theory of money. All the evidence points to the credit theory of money, and I find often when I talk about this, people want to bring up, well, look at Mises' money regression theorem. And the fact that it's a theorem, it's true by definition. That's what a theorem is. It's true by definition. Mises' money regression idea is a hypothesis that doesn't have the evidence to back it up. So if I want to have a discussion about economics, and I say, well, here's the evidence that points to the state theory of money, and someone's like, oh yeah, but the money regression theorem, they're putting their reasoning before the evidence. They're saying your facts contradict the reasoning that I'm working with, so it must not be true. I'll give more examples later. All right, here's Deepak Chopra. Let's listen to him for our good example of breaking link 3.
How does the human body think, thoughts, play a piano, kill germs, remove toxins, make a baby all at the same time, while monitoring the movement of stars and planets as its own biological rhythm? So it's a mystery, and I don't think the mystery can be solved.
So is that not cynical, though, to say that you don't think the mystery can be solved because we haven't gotten there yet? Isn't that cynical?
No, it's come after a lot of thought, Travis. It's come after 50 years of self-reflection, which led me to believe today that I don't know anything.
Which is something like this. This is actually kind of a calculus experiment, or a calculus mind experiment, thought experiment. Is that, okay, in an infinite universe, or a universe is so big that in terms of our comparison to it, we can't differentiate between it being a certain size and it being infinite. As I learn more, I learn that there are more things that I don't know. So as I increase my learning, I'm actually increasing that which I am unaware of even faster. So in terms of what I know, the more that I learn, the more that the gap between what I know and what I know that I don't know gets bigger. So if I take it to the end, limit as x approaches infinity, I see that my knowledge goes to 0, right? Okay, that's cute, but there is such thing as real knowledge, and for him to come out, and I think you guys see what he did. It was a word salad here. How does a body remove germs, and how does it make a baby? How does it eliminate toxins at the same time understand the movement of the stars? These are all sorts of connected. This isn't an argument. He's just saying big words, right? These big ideas all at the same time. And because I cannot understand it, I must conclude that I know nothing. So, in over 50 years, you've concluded that you've known nothing. And the guy, or whatever I don't even know what his name is, Travis Pangburn, I mean, just skewers him to the wall right as a response that, doesn't this make you cynical if you think you know nothing? Or if you think you cannot know anything, because that's really what he's saying. I can't know anything. Well, if you can't know anything, there's no reason to attempt to gain more knowledge. There's no reason to try to solve anything. It's very cynical, and he doesn't have a good answer for it. He says, no, I'm not cynical, and then his non sequitur response, I guess he breaks the second link here too. His second link breaking response is that, well, I just came to this after 50 years of reflection. What the hell does that have to do with anything? So this is a perfect example of third link broken. Often with New Age bullshit. So here's some examples of infected ideas. The New Age movement, it's not possible to actually know anything. Immanuel Kant and other German philosophers, we cannot know objective reality. We can only know the appearances that are in our mind. So there's no actual connection. There's no union between the internal mind and the external objective reality. Different religious ideas. Any idea that revokes what we can see in front of our faces over an interpretation of some scripture. The sun moves around the earth because the Bible or the Quran or the Vedas or whatever said so. And now, this isn't me criticizing any particular religion. This is me criticizing an interpretation of a religion where there's something clear in front of you that you could see in front of your face, and you say, no, wait a minute, my reasoning back here disagrees with that, so the reasoning must trump the evidence. Again, claims to omniscience. A really good example of this is pre-Newtonian, in quotes, science. So before Newton, I'll talk about Galileo here in a second. Before Newton, scientists would make arbitrary claims and argue back and forth about them. And often when new discoveries new discoveries were often opposed because they conflicted with whatever arbitrary theory that they had been running with before. A perfect example of this is with Galileo, two examples, that the planetary orbits had to be circular because God created the heavens perfectly, and the circle is a perfect shape. So the orbits can't be elliptical, they have to be circular. And if you see evidence otherwise, that's untrue because that contradicts the perfection of God making the heavens. And the second example, there was an argument between Galileo, I guess this happened in writings back and forth, argument between Galileo and some cardinal of the day, where Galileo, after he turned his telescope to the moon and said, hey, I see mountains and I see valleys in the moon, the cardinal got all upset going, well, no. The moon's a perfect sphere. The heavens are perfect. Everything in the heavens are perfect. So every heavenly body that you see has to be a perfect sphere. So even if you think that you see mountains and you see valleys, what's actually happening is there's an invisible layer of matter that goes around the moon. So you see mountains and you see valleys, but it's actually still a perfect sphere with this invisible layer on top of it. And Galileo had a perfect response as he said, yes, there is an invisible layer, but that invisible layer also has mountains and valleys. But again, do you see how this leads to claims of omniscience? And it's just this mental gymnastics of how you can just get out of it. And Galileo did a perfect response to this, which is he simply applied the same ability to himself. Like, I can make up whatever I want to. But the cardinal doesn't have to be responsible for the evidence of understanding reality that Galileo puts forth because it contradicts his reasoning, and he says, no, my reasoning now beats your evidence. Moving on to link 4. This is action. Or, as I have inside the link, this is free will versus determinism. So what is it? We act within a universe that we don't control. Or said otherwise, we make free will choices within a universe that is deterministic. We control ourselves. We cannot control the universe. And we do have the ability to influence others, but ultimately, others control themselves. So if we use our layman's terms as we've been moving forward, so if link 1, things are what they are, therefore link 2, things do what they do, therefore link 3, there are things to know and things to understand, therefore link 4, we can take action based on our knowledge and understanding. Why must this be true for responsibility to exist? We must have free will. Otherwise, we couldn't make any choices, right? The ability to make a choice is your free will. So if there was no free will, nobody could be responsible for anything because nobody ever made a choice. Remember, we looked at the beginning that responsibility and free will, even if they're not exactly the same thing, which I'm not entirely convinced that they're not. Did I say that right? I suspect that they are the same thing. Even if they're not the same thing, they're so intertwined that if you get rid of the concept of free will, you've also gotten rid of the concept of responsibility, right? Determinism is also required because if we did not live in a world that was deterministic or a universe that was deterministic, nobody could do anything to anybody else. If you create all of your own reality and I create all my own reality, what if I punch you in the nose and you get a bloody nose? You did that. That's your fault. You create your own reality. So in order for responsibility to exist, we must have a deterministic universe with real consequences, with free will actors operating within that universe. And I got a picture here of Leonard Cohen, who is before my time, but I've stumbled upon him anyway. And I just bring him up because he liked to could you even call what he did singing? He liked to sing about these ideas. And there's this one, I'll read this one quote from one of his songs. This is catching it in the middle of a verse, but he says, all of these are expressions of the sweet indifference some call love, the high indifference some call fate, but we had names more intimate. So the sweet indifference called love, it's indifferent because even though you did something to me that I don't like, I can choose to forgive you. That's love. The high indifference some call fate. Even if I want to change it, it's indifferent. Like, this is what's happening to you, whether you like it or not. That's it. Fate is the deterministic aspect in this song, and love is the free will aspect of this song. Not vital to understanding this, but just when you understand this, you start seeing it in other places. So how do you break the fourth link? First, you could posit that there is a 100% deterministic universe. You will typically find this from overly scientific, in quotes, types, people who believe in scientism. I'm not going to explain what that is here, but you could find it pretty quickly. I probably already know what it is. You could posit there is a 100% free will universe. You could identify a free will choice as something deterministic or vice versa, right? Like, that rock just fell off a cliff. That's your fault. And as I was putting this together, I actually realized that there's a fourth way to break this link, which is to claim that action in and of itself is bad. Now, I've got a picture here of kind of this new agey person in the lotus position meditating with his chakras lit up. I did this to evoke a new age idea because to posit a 100% free will universe or to claim that action in itself is bad are ideas that are really pushed forth by the new age movement. Don't act, just observe. Okay, so let's look at some examples. This is the way I talk and you can't change it. Ever had anybody say that to you? I love it when people say that to me now. What someone is saying, this is the way I talk and you can't change it, is they're ascribing a deterministic aspect to something that is free will. Now, let me preface that by saying, maybe I've been smoking my whole life and this is the way I talk and you can't change it. Yeah, okay, in that case it's true. But normally when people say this, they're doing it when they're being rude, they're being offensive, they're being hostile, they're taking a really terrible tone with you, and if you address it and say, hey, I don't like that tone, and they turn around and say, this is the way I am and you can't change it, what they're saying is, I can't change, therefore you must. Do you see why? We've come to an impasse. I want to keep talking this way. You want me to stop. Both of these can't happen at the same time. If this is the way I am and you can't change it, then I get to continue the way that I'm going and you have to give way. So you have the free will to make a choice, but I don't. Is what's being said here. Do you see how that's manipulative, how that breaks the fourth link? I'm not responsible for being careful and being considerate when I'm speaking to you. I don't have control over myself. Well, the easiest way to watch somebody melt when they try this crap on you is just flip it on them. Well, this is the way I talk and you can't change it. The way I talk when somebody does that to me is to raise my voice and get a little bit aggressive and want to fight. Oh, God. They change so fast after you do that. It's so weird. It is what it is. Now, sometimes it is what it is. Okay? The sun's coming up tomorrow. It is what it is. But usually when people say this, they say it because they have the ability to change something and they don't want to try, so they just say it is what it is. I remember having a conversation with a fellow business owner. I used to own a junk removal company, and I met with a guy who, a local competitor who owned a junk removal company. We were friendly. And he was talking about his poor ability at bidding jobs. And when I started talking to him about, okay, why don't you try this or why don't you try that? He just said, yeah, it is what it is. No, it's not. Right? you're doing it badly and you have the opportunity to like change your behavior to do it better. It's not is what it is. And I think that's a good example of someone who has a certain lifestyle and they don't want that lifestyle to change. And if you said, hey, you're responsible for making better decisions to improve your lifestyle and your family's lifestyle, well then once you know that, you're responsible for doing it. Well, if he can is what it is it and say, oh, that's a deterministic aspect, not something that's a free will choice, well then he's not responsible for it anymore. There's no such thing as free will. This is the determinist argument, which, if that's true, why are you talking to me? If there's no such thing as free will, why are you trying to convince me of anything? You create your own reality. We already discussed that. I have heard from someone that a person actually told her this once. This is a relationship with a boss and her boss. She didn't like something, and this is what the boss said in response. You see, before you were born, you chose to be incarnated in this experience in this life. So what's happening to you now is something you chose to experience before you were born. This is a fancy way of saying you create your own reality. And the easiest way to respond to this is, okay, well, the same applies to you. And this is how, and the upset way I'm responding to this and making it your problem is the thing that you chose to experience before you were born. I'm not responsible for changing my behavior. You chose to experience before you were born. You have to accept the world as it is. This is kind of a Buddhist interpretation, right? I don't know if it's all Buddhist, but there's some Buddhists that interpret it this way, and that's bullshit. Yeah, the world's bad. You can't make the world not bad, so you need to learn how to accept it as it is. Examples continued. This is one where people really, really have a lot. They attack this one a lot. Let's keep going. Look what you made me do. You did it. You're the one who made the choice, but it's my fault. Things just happen. This is like, it is what it is. You provoked me. Now, again, in some of these cases, there are valid times to say this. Like if you punch, I like the example of punching in the nose, right? If you punch me and I punch you back and you're like, oh my God, you hit me. Yeah, you provoked me. You hit me first, dorkwad. Well, I do that because I have ADD or I have a disease or I take these medications. Well, that was the alcohol speaking. I'm not responsible. The inanimate object, the inanimate drug is responsible for that. Which I guess that's the case these days. There was a recent court determination where a girl murdered her boyfriend, stabbed him like 108 times, and got off with a slap on the wrist, no jail time, because she was high at the time, and so she was psychotic. So it wasn't me, it was the marijuana. I guess it's a valid excuse now. Why are you taking it like that? Now again, I mean there are some times where this is valid, but you can see where if I'm taking it the way that it's actually happening, and why are you taking it like that? Because that's what's actually happening, bitch. It's just their culture. Now, this is a big one now, right? Where the bigger problem in Europe, but people from another culture come over and they rape and they pillage and they murder and they steal, and that's just their culture, so it's okay. They're not responsible for their actions because that's just their culture. Their culture is a deterministic aspect of themselves, and they can't control it. And I mean, this actually kind of breaks link number one too, because it's also saying there's no such thing as objective morality. You'll find that often a attack will break multiple links, and it doesn't matter which one is broken. You just have to identify it, one broken, and then move on. Can't you just let it go? I know I abused you as a child, and I haven't done anything to rectify it or to apologize or anything, but it was in the past. Can't you just let it go? It's your fault. You're making the act of free will choice to hold on to this terrible thing that happened to you. Why are you blaming me? I don't have any responsibility for changing or atoning for my behavior. You're just refusing to let it go. Yeah. All right, here's a new age one. Ignore the negative. You give power to whatever you focus on, right? This is also breaking the second link. This is confusing cause and effect. But your free will choice is making that thing over there stronger by even looking at it. Here's another SMBC comic. this guy produces a comic a day and has for like years and years and years. So there were actually more that I wanted, but I couldn't go back and find them because when it comes to philosophy, he's got these comics that just hit the nail on the head on points that I'm talking about. So I got this comic here. Here's Batman in a guillotine. And there's an arch villain or a villain standing across from him. And Batman says to the villain, "You'll never get away with it, historical materialist." And the historical materialist says, "I don't need to. Since the flow of human action is the product of economic forces. Oh, excuse me. I don't need to, since the flow of human action is the product of economic forces. If the laws that govern economies kill Batman, then the hand that presses the button is incidental." And Batman goes, "So," and then gets his head cut off. Now, before reading this, I didn't even know historical materialism was a idea or a philosophy that you could interpret history with. But this perfectly elucidates the point that I'm making. This is a 100 deterministic worldview, and the guy pushing the button is going, "I'm not responsible because the world is 100% deterministic." Okay, let's look at our video example here. This is Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Greene. I don't know. I'm not familiar with Brian Greene. Two scientists that are arguing over free will and determinism, and here's the crap that they have to say about it.
If free will doesn't exist at the level of physics, in other words, if it doesn't exist at the level of physics, could it not exist at the level of biology or, say, psychology?
That's right. So it's a very good point, and it really depends on what your definition of free will is, right? Normally, the intuitive definition is things could have been different, and I could have made a choice for things to turn out differently. And if that's your definition of free will, does that resonate with your perspective of free will? Then I don't see any way to square that with the laws of physics, because anything that you do is your particles executing some kind of motion, and the motion of your particles in your brain, in your body, have no opportunity to allow you as a conscious being to direct them. What force could possibly that direction come from? Is it the electromagnetic force? Well, that one we understand from Maxwell. Is it the gravitational force? We understand that one from Einstein. Is it the nuclear forces? Those we understand from the standard model of particle physics. What force could you possibly exert on your particles that goes against or goes beyond those that emerge from the equations of physics? That's the issue.
Could our free will thrive?
Okay, well, now, I don't really care what Neil deGrasse Tyson has to say about it after the fact, but we don't have any free will. I guess he isn't directly saying we don't have it, but he's really challenging the idea. How can we possibly have free will if we're just a bunch of particles executing some sort of motion? Because in terms of the laws of physics that we have, the laws of physics can't explain where the ability to make a choice might come from. Well, again, as we pointed out, if there's no such thing as free will, there is no such thing as responsibility. And I guarantee this guy, if I mugged him, would try to hold me responsible for it. And if I came up, well, I'm just, a bunch of particles executing some sort of motion, and I'm not really in control of my actions, so therefore you can't, he wouldn't buy it. I mean, this is like the jerk and the clerk example back from link 1. People don't actually believe this stuff. They don't, whenever they're breaking these links, they don't actually believe it. Right? Now, in terms of, here's these 4 fundamental physical forces that physics and chemistry use to describe that are our best ways of describing reality. I'm not criticizing the validity of the math and those forces and how people have interpreted. Well, I am criticizing how people have interpreted that often, particularly this. But to say that, here's the work that we've done, and we're not able to build a house with the bricks that we have. Well, you mentioned Einstein. Einstein's relativity can't seem to figure out where 80% of the mass in the universe is. Right? Physics can't explain how a bicycle works. Go look up some YouTube videos and see that, like, there hasn't been a physicist yet that can explain how a bicycle operates the way that it does. Right? Physics, you get my point, is that science doesn't explain everything in its totality. We use it to understand our universe. It's not complete understanding of the universe. And if we come from the aspect that responsibility is self-evident, and we say, these things that we thought up, we're not able to put together in a sophisticated way that creates free will on the other end, so what? Again, you still believe in free will because I guarantee that he would try to hold me responsible if I did something to him that he didn't like. Because I made the choice. Fourth link, broken. Here's some infected ideas for the fourth link. Predestination, right? Now, before I get criticisms of, oh my God, you don't really understand how predestination works. Oh, really? So I was so predestination, of course, is this idea that God chooses whether or not that you're saved, whether or not you're going to hell or heaven, and what you do, your actions don't actually control that. And what effect this has is that, again, people suddenly don't become responsible for anything anymore. And I was listening to a presentation by the man named Bruce Gore. Awesome on anything church, Christian history. I'm really, really digging listening to this guy, Bruce Gore. And he had this presentation on a man named Jonathan Edwards, who was a guy, I think this is 17th century, maybe early 18th century. He was a Puritan, and Puritans were Calvinists, or predestinationists. This is where Calvin is the guy. John Calvin is the guy who came up with this predestination thing. And he's in the Americas, and one day he wakes up and he decides that I need to bring the gospel to the natives of America. It's really, really important that I bring my gospel to the natives of America. I mean, go back to the beginning of part 1 where I'm like, what is your grand idea? And then imagine taking your grand idea to your friends and see how they respond. So Jonathan Edwards takes his grand idea to his friends, and his friends go, no. God chooses who to convert and who not. God chooses who to save and who not. God chooses who he's going to bring to Christ and who he's not. We don't get involved with that. Do you see the implications of believing this sort of stuff? Now, I guess on one hand, if they believe this and he wants to spread it, maybe it's good that it didn't get spread, but that's not the point. The point is, here's me showing the responsibility. Part of the whole idea behind Christianity is you need to spread the gospel. You need to spread the good news that Jesus came to save everybody, and to show them that this is the way that you get saved. I mean, that's part and parcel of the religion, and somehow this got turned on its head. Maybe this doesn't describe all Calvinists everywhere, right? But for these ones in particular, these Puritans that Jonathan Edwards was butting up against, they said, I'm not responsible for spreading the gospel because God does it. The universe does it. It's out of my hands. I don't have control. Bullshit. Breaking link 4. We discussed this in depth. New Age religion, you create your own reality. I don't have to go over that again. On the far end, any sort of religious extremism where God controls every aspect of everything. You could even call this fatalism. Like I think Islam is famous for this sort of thinking. God controls every aspect of everything, so anything, including human action, happens as a direct action from God. Well, if that's true, then there's no such thing as free will. Scientism or atheism, as we just looked at with the video, everything is inanimate matter. Atoms just bouncing around. It's all predetermined and nobody makes a choice. These all break link 4. And this isn't necessarily an intellectual self-defense thing. It's tangentially relevant. But I do want to give you take the opportunity to give you a secret. This is a secret about free will. You ready for this? The more free will you think you have, the more you seem to get. The less free will you think you have, the less you seem to get. Right? I mean, just going back to the Jonathan Edwards example, the less free will that they thought they had, the less they got. I can't convert any natives because it's out of my control. Well, I guess you don't have that anymore because that's what you believe. You don't have that free will anymore because you believe that you don't have it. Whereas Jonathan Edwards, he believed he did have it. So then he could act on it. So the more you think you have, the more you seem to get. The less you think you have, the less you seem to get. Now, I equated responsibility, or almost equated, at least heavily intertwined responsibility with free will. I'm also going to heavily intertwine free will with power. Free will is a component of power. My ability to make a choice is my ability to influence external reality. What are some examples of power? There's political power. What if I'm the president of the United States? There's a lot of things I could do with that power that I can make choices about that I would not be able to do if I didn't have that power. There's financial power. If I'm a billionaire, what am I able to do with that money to influence others and to build? If I have celebrity power, what am I able to influence with that? If I have voice power, right? If I'm able to talk like this, how much can I really influence people? Versus if I'm able to talk like this and be direct and project, I have voice power, right? All these things are choices that I'm able to make if I have, all these things are powers that I have if I have the free will choice to do them. So anybody who tries to convince you, let me say this first. The more free will you have, the more power you have, which means that anybody who's trying to convince you that you don't have free will is trying to sap you of their power. And if you let them convince you, you are letting them sap you of your power. What else can that be other than a Second Circuit interaction? Last link. Judgment. Also, intention means and ends. What is it? Having acted, we are able to judge those actions. There are 3 ways we can morally judge an action, and only one is correct. We can judge action by intention, by the means of the action, what was actually done, or the accomplishments or the ends of that action. The winner here is the means. The correct way to judge an action is by what was actually done, not the intention and not what was accomplished. Why must this be true for responsibility to exist? If judgment based on intention were valid, a person could just intend all their responsibility away. This is the example I gave in part 1 with my dad always saying, I was trying to be polite, I was trying to be polite, I was trying to be polite. It's an appeal to intention to say, I'm not responsible for changing my behavior because I intended a certain thing. If we were to judge actions on ends, a person could accomplish all of their responsibility away. I know I treated you poorly as a child, but look how great you turned out. Then if you judge people on the means of what they did, it holds people accountable for what they actually did. So it turns out that there's actually 4 ways to break link 5. The first is, should have figured this out by now. You can judge actions by their intentions. You can judge actions by their ends. There's 3 ways to break it. And again, I realized this as I was putting this slideshow together, is that there's actually a 3rd way to do it. Is you could judge that judging actions is bad. Which is, again, another self-contradictory thing, because if I judge that actions are bad, that's a judgment in and of itself. You shouldn't judge people. Don't judge, don't judge, don't judge. And I have to step aside a second here, and I said I was going to come back to this, right, in both parts 1 and parts 2. The appeal to intention. This, of all the links that I talked about, and all the ways to break those links, this is my number 1 pet peeve, because this is the armchair quarterback. This is the lazy man's favorite technique. This is armchair quarterback sophistry. You can just intend everything one way. I didn't mean it. No, I meant this. You don't have to get up out of your chair. You don't have to accomplish everything. You just have this magic spell called I didn't mean it to wave all your responsibility away. I will reiterate now, as I reiterated in parts 1 and parts 2, that your intention doesn't matter. Really? Intention really doesn't matter, but Dylan, he really didn't mean it. How can you say he's responsible when he really, really didn't mean it? When identifying a 3-2 slip, I said this in part 2 in detail, intention doesn't matter. It's still happening, right? If I'm if I'm doing target practice and I go out into the woods and you happen to be in the bush and I don't know you're there and I shoot you and I don't intend to, you still got shot. Now, in the case that I explained, who was at fault? Should I have checked to make sure that there was nobody there? Probably. Or was I at a shooting range and you shouldn't have been there because everybody knows that people are shooting? I mean, we can go back and forth on who's responsible for what happened. But just to say, oh, I didn't mean it. It still happened. Now, when determining a strategy or response to when somebody does this, intention does matter. If they legitimately didn't intend to do it, your strategy for dealing with it is actually a lot easier, because at that point you should be able to point out what they did and then go, oh crap, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to change my behavior. Versus if they did intend to do it, they're going to fight you when you bring up changing their behavior or holding them accountable for what they did. This is the example I brought up in part 2. We can look at law to see that this is just a common understanding. Like if we compare manslaughter to murder, manslaughter gets a lesser sentence than murder because manslaughter, you didn't intend to kill the person. Yes, I was driving recklessly. I intended to drive recklessly, but I did not intend to kill the person. So my punishment for killing the person is less than if I had intended to drive over that person. Now, yes, in terms of your punishment from the law, that will change your punishment. But for the person run over, they're still dead. It still happened. They still have to deal with the consequences of it. Just like you, if a 3-2 slip happened and the guy didn't intend it, you're still being manipulated. Responsibility is still being shoved around. People are still trying to not be held accountable for their actions. Okay? Intention does not matter for intellectual self-defense identification. It only matters for the strategy that you choose to deal with it. Here's some fifth link examples. Here's the intention. I got this picture of this dog giving a puppy face going, and the meme is, I didn't really mean it. That's not what I meant. We just talked about that ad nauseum. I was trying to be polite. Already addressed that one. I know I treated you horribly, but look how you turned out. This is an appeal to ends, right? Never judge anyone on their culture. Like I said in link 4, I guess this is more of a link 5 thing, which is I can't judge that person on what they actually did. They have their own culture, and I guess this is where you break the link by just not judging people at all. The end justifies the means. I mean, that just explains itself on its face. If you want to make an omelet, you need to crack a few eggs. Now, there are times where this makes sense. I mean, literally, if you want to make an omelet, you got to crack the eggs. If you want to build a house, you got to cut down some trees, right? But often when people say this is because they're trying to not be held responsible for the things that they did, and they're saying the ends justifies the means. It doesn't matter who started the fight. This is another way of saying don't judge. Doesn't matter who started the fight. Yeah, it kind of does. When it comes to aggression and self-defense, who started the fight is all that matters. That's the only important point. I had another comic I was going to show, but this recording is going long. I'm going to skip it. If you want to go search that yourself after the fact, go for it. And this gives an opportunity to discuss fake forgiveness, because this is really a prevalent problem, particularly if you get into fake Christian understandings and fake Christian circles. Can't you just forgive me? Forgiving everything is exactly the same as enabling abuse. If I allow you to hit me over and over and over and over again, and I just forgive you every time, then I'm just letting you hit me over and over again. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness has 3 components, okay? And I did steal this directly from Mark Passio, so thanks, Mark. The first thing, in order for forgiveness to be valid, the perpetrator, the guy who did the bad thing, must apologize. Second, after the perpetrator has apologized, the perpetrator must discontinue the wrong behavior. I apologize and I change the behavior. Then, after the apology and the perpetrator has changed the behavior, the victim has the opportunity to forgive. That's real forgiveness. There's 2 sides to this, right? Forgiving everything is exactly the same as not judging anything. And as we pointed out and showed, that breaks link 5, and it's a 3-2 slip. Can't you just forgive me when I don't apologize and I don't change my behavior? Well, don't judge me is what that means, which is breaking link 5, which is a 3-2 slip. And here's an example of some juicy, high-quality television. So I'm not going to play the whole thing, so let me describe this real quick. This is one of those stupid court shows where you get the drama from these low-quality individuals coming in and suing each other. There's this girl who gets engaged to this guy. The guy gives her an expensive wedding ring. She cheats on him in order to call off the wedding and then keeps the ring, saying in the state of California this is an unconditional gift. And the guy's suing her for the ring. So check this out.
Okay, and what happened after that?
So, I kind of thought in my head maybe we could work it out. It's just one of those things. Yeah, I do love her.
So you wanted to work it out.
He started screaming, and went crazy.
Screaming
Yes,
like
he went crazy. It was, Your Honor, he's making it seem like it's a way bigger thing than it was.
Oh my goodness, what did he do? Tell me.
Well, it was completely different. Your Honor, yes, we were at this wedding. Everyone was very drunk. I went with my best friend to the hot tub at the hotel, and it got a little bit crazy. We started making out. His best man, his best friend, came in, and I probably should have not let that happen, but it was just it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just a silly, drunken, being silly in a hot tub. He showed up and went completely crazy. I apologize. I don't think it was something to call a wedding off over. I understand that he was upset.
Excuse me,
I understand you were upset, but I don't see why he had to call off the whole wedding. I didn't want to call off the wedding.
How did you react, or how did you feel when you saw your fiancé and he walked in on you with your friend and his best friend?
Your Honor, I was surprised that he was so angry because everyone was so drunk, and I didn't think that it was that big of a deal.
So you don't think it was a big deal that you cheated on him?
It was just making out. I didn't even really think it was cheating. At a wedding when everyone's drunk?
I don't even have a good comeback for that one.
Thank you.
I really don't. I'm usually really quick, and I just don't. I don't. I'm speechless for once.
That was about it. After that, I told her she had to leave.
He said you have to be out in 3 days.
Oh, I wouldn't have given you 3 days. You're lucky you got 3 days.
Thank
but
you.
anyway, so you had her move out.
Correct. And I did a little bit of investigating, and afterwards.
I have a question for you before you tell me, because I know the witness is here. So you broke up with her.
Correct.
You gave her 3 days to leave the
Correct.
apartment. Did she leave reluctantly, or was she like, whatever, I'm leaving?
Oh, yeah, no, she just picked up and left. There was nothing to her.
I thought that maybe if you had a little bit of time to cool off and let this blow over, that it would be okay, and we can talk about this and work it out.
All right. Did you ask for the ring back?
Yes.
And she said no.
Correct. Very
Your Honor,
politely
in the
as
state
well.
of California, the law states that this is an unconditional gift.
Okay.
So I'm entitled to the ring.
Did you think it was morally appropriate for you to keep that ring?
I did.
Why?
I was heartbroken.
Why
Your
do you
Honor,
deserve that ring?
because I'm still ready to get married. It was
But
given
he doesn't
to me.
want to marry you.
It was given to me as a gift, and I
It was
accepted
given
that
to you
gift.
as a gift that you were going to be faithful and you were going to honor him for the rest of your life.
I'm still ready to make that commitment.
I don't think you understand what that commitment is. So then anyway, how many times did you try asking for it back?
So many. I reached out to her via email, sent her text messages.
She wouldn't say, sorry, I'm keeping it, it's mine.
Nothing.
I'm going to stay to California,
I would have
it's
wished
mine.
she would have even said that. I got no response
Nothing.
at all.
She just ignored you.
Correct.
You were really trying to work things out, weren't you?
Yes, I wanted him to cool off.
How long did you try to get the ring back?
Oh, up until just about now.
It was about 3 months ago, Your Honor.
So no response for 3
Nothing.
months?
Nothing,
Okay.
Your Honor.
All right, so then you find this friend that you have in common or mutual on your online personal accounts,
Correct.
and what happened?
So I remember his name was Adam Vincent. So I went up into a little search thing and found his name. And I remembered his profile picture, so I pulled it up and I looked at him and I just said, hey, I'm just a little curious. How do you know Cynthia Bennett? And it definitely struck a nerve. I asked him, I said, hey, would you be opposed to going and grabbing a drink? Let's just go down to the bar and grab a drink and talk about this. It's a little bit more personal. So me and Adam went and we had a drink. And that was just the last straw. That's when I decided that
Adam, why don't you stand up and tell me, do you know the witness, Miss Bennett?
Yes, Your Honor, I do.
You do, okay.
Hello, Your Honor.
You intimately know the witness?
Yeah, I can't believe that he's here today. This is...
I bet you can't.
Yes.
Okay.
From
All right,
several years ago, I know
so,
the witness.
Mr. Vincent, why don't you tell me what you shared with Mr. Vaughn?
So Cynthia is my former, and fiance.
Oh, fiance, you were engaged to
Yeah,
her?
we were engaged as well, 7 years ago. So
Okay.
this is far, far back. We met our mid-20s. Great time. She's a great girl, likes to party. She's very spoiled. I spent a lot of money on her. We traveled, of course, I eventually, like I said, I proposed to her. She accepted the proposal. We were getting ready for our marriage. I'm a finance banker, work long hours, long shifts.
How do you get these guys? What is it about you get these two good-looking professional guys?
Yeah,
okay,
tell me about
go ahead.
it.
I'm so confused.
Yeah, I'm confused too, ma'am.
So then what happened? So you proposed?
I come home, literally, I kid you not. My baby brother and Miss Cynthia are literally having sex in my bed. And like I said, it threw me off.
Wow, were you drunk? Was it just a mistake?
Your Honor, this was 7 years ago. I was like 22 years old.
Oh my God,
it was a mistake. I apologize. That was wrong.
It's always a mistake when you confront
So then
Cynthia
what
about
did she
anything.
say to you? How did she respond?
I mean, once again, like I said, it was such a horrible, just scene. So, I leave the house. I probably just reach out to her a couple of weeks like, hey, I just want my ring back, the engagement ring. I spent 10 grand on it. Yes, ma'am, but she hit me with this California law. I proposed to her in California. She's a California resident.
Is that
I'm a
what
California
she told
resident
you?
now. Ma'am, I don't know what to tell you when it comes to Cynthia. Like I said, that's why I'm standing here next to Mr. Vaughn.
Coming up on...
How many times have you been engaged before?
Your Honor, I've been engaged twice.
Twice?
I loved...
Twice
that
what
we
she
know
tells
of.
you, yeah. That's what she's telling you.
Your Honor, I loved...
It's a good little
Adam
business.
very much.
It's a
I was
good
too young.
little business you
I
have.
was too young to be engaged with Adam. I loved him very much.
No, can I see the ring? Would you mind? Renard, can you get the ring, please?
You want me to take it off?
Of course, please.
Hey, Bernard,
See how beautiful it is. So this was your grandmother's
My
ring.
grandfather actually gave that diamond.
It's just the
to my
diamond. It's
grandmother.
not the setting.
It's a beautiful diamond.
Thank you.
Jeez. Give it to Mr. Vaughn, please. It's his. It's not yours.
Your Honor, how is that legally his?
Oh, it's legally his because, you're very smart, and I think it's a really great little scam you have going on for yourself here. It's the donor. He gave it to me. He broke up. Therefore, I get to keep it. But in these no-fault states, there's also something called fraud. So it is my opinion, and listen to this, it is my opinion that you on purpose did this so you can keep the ring. So it was your actions, your unfaithfulness that made him break up with you. So therefore, he would have never broken up with you but for the fact that you got drunk and it was no big deal and you made out with the girl and the boy and then that's it, end of story. You should be ashamed of yourself because what you're doing is that you're abusing the law and you are convincing, manipulating. I seriously don't know how she connived you, how both of you guys are so handsome, such smart professionals. How did you let her completely fool you?
Your Honor, I had a wonderful relationship
Sweetheart,
with each of these men.
I don't think you understand what wonderful is. You don't understand.
Okay, so I let that go for so long because I wanted to have the judge call her out. And, I do got to say, I'm also pretty confused here. That woman is not that attractive. I have no idea how she could get guys spending that much money on her, not being that attractive. But side point, what did she say? It was a mistake. Oh, fifth link broken. Sorry. It was a mistake. I was so drunk. I apologized. It's not a big deal. And what was the result? Right? What were all these things? I mean, I was drunk was breaking the fourth link because she's saying I wasn't responsible. I wasn't making free will choices. But it was all, don't judge me for my actions. I apologized. And this goes back to the fake forgiveness, right? I apologized, but did not change the behavior. Right? It was a mistake. I didn't intend it. These are all, she had so many broken fifth links in here. And what was the actual result is two men getting robbed. These have real freaking consequences. These are real consequences, right? And I played it until the end because I wanted you to see that the judge, I don't remember if she takes a little bit more, she calls the boys out. How did you let this happen? How did you let this girl fool you with this bullshit? Doesn't say bullshit. Hold herself in contempt of court, I guess, if she did that. But this is obviously stupid stuff that she's saying, and you're falling for it, which is why you're in the mess that you're in now. You are not holding her responsible for her actions, and you're letting her walk all over you. Here's some infected ideas on the fifth link. The rapture. Ooh, I'm hitting everything today, aren't I? The rapture is an appeal to attention. I accept Jesus. I know that I'm going to be raptured. I'm saved. I no longer have any responsibility to operate in the world and make sure to resist evil in the real world because I'm saved. And I mean, there's some rapture guys even further saying, well, in order for Jesus to come back, such and such thing needs to happen in Israel. So we need to help promote this war so Israel can get the Palestinians out so they can build the third temple. And the third temple is what's needed for Jesus to come back. So I need to promote evil in order to do good. Well, I guess in that case, it's a appeal to ends. But the lazier version of understanding and believing the rapture is I don't have to do anything. I can just lean back and bask in the sun, knowing that my actions save me, and I don't have any responsibility to the rest of the world. Breaks link 5 turns into a lazy POS. Consequentialism. This is a philosophy that posits that the end justifies the means. Just says it straight out. Utilitarianism. This is a fancier consequentialism. The doctrine that actions are right if they are useful or for the benefit of the majority. It's useful for me that I steal your stuff, so the action must be right. Immanuel Kant. This is some guy describing Immanuel Kant's interpretation of how to judge action. He, Kant, evaluates the moral status of actions not according to the action itself or according to its consequences, but according to the maxim of action. Well, what's that? The moral status of an action is determined by the actor's intentions or reasons for acting. Bullshit. Kant is total crap. This is such total crap. And then again, the New Age belief, don't judge anyone ever. Oh, pacifism. Pacifism, forgive everybody for everything. I mean, this is, we talked about this. This is fake forgiveness. This is essentially not judging anybody for anything. So now, we've gone over all 5 of these links. And this is the beauty when I put these ideas together. Like I said, I had these individual ideas and I put them together. Let's bring it back to the 4 circuits. Let's bring it back to the 3-2 slip. Let's bring it back to the fallacy. If you identify that anybody breaks one link, because all 5 things are required in order to connect a person to the responsibility, anytime one link breaks, it makes the whole chain useless. So if you can identify that somebody is breaking a link, even whether it's a grand philosophy or religious idea or little quips, this is the way I talk and you can't change me, then you know a fallacy has occurred. You know that there is a 3-2 slip, and you don't need to go any further. That's the beauty of this. You don't need to tell the person what fallacy that they're committing. You don't need to find it. You don't need to put up syllogisms. You go, bam, 4th link broken. I know someone's trying to manipulate me, and I know that the first thing I need to do is to stop being reasonable. And I'm going to talk a little bit about strategy at the end here. But when you stop being reasonable, when you can find this and you can stop being reasonable, people will, the difference in what you're going to experience with your personal interactions is going to be night and day. They will scurry away like cockroaches. It's unreal. Yes. So yeah, sophistry, 3-2 slip, manipulation. If one link gets broken, the whole chain becomes useless, and you know there's a 3-2 slip. You don't need to worry about finding the fallacy. Yeah, I'm repeating it here again. This is a high-speed litmus test. If any link is broken, then a 3-2 slip has occurred. This applies to personal, societal, political, philosophical, and religious interactions and ideas, but the most important is personal. Why? Why? Which relationships affect your actions the most? Which relationships do you form your most important thoughts from? And which relationships affect your feelings the most? Commercials and politicians aren't the ones directly manipulating you. It's your friends and family. That's why I've included all these little quips. It was a mistake. I didn't mean it. Oh, there's no such thing as reality. There's your truth and my truth. Let's agree to disagree. Well, so what you're saying, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff are different ways that people break the links of the chain of responsibility so they don't get held responsible for their or they don't get held accountable for their personal responsibility. This is a superior intellectual self-defense technique. I mean, I think I've made that clear. I hope you understand that. And when it comes to philosophy, let me bring this back to philosophy. The chain of responsibility is philosophy, and anything else isn't. Right? if the philosophical idea is consistent with the chain of responsibility, it is philosophy. If it's not consistent with the chain of responsibility, or it's not philosophy, it's sophistry. This is why if you go to a philosophy class, it's so fucking boring, is because they're introducing sophistry as if it is philosophy, and you just get lost in this world of subjectivism. But if you have this grounding, suddenly all this stuff becomes clear. You don't get lost in all the crazy terminology and vague crap and subjectivist perception, qualia, all this sort of stuff, is you can see clearly and act with it. And what I've done is I've actually done the philosophy backwards. I started at the end by the observation that responsibility is self-evident. Everybody believes it because we could look at their actions, that if anything contradicts the existence of responsibility, we know that it's invalid. Do you see how fucking cool this is? You can now fight with high-level sophists who manipulate with philosophy, and you don't need to understand the terminology. Do you guys see this? Do you see this? Someone can hoity-toity you all day, but if you can address it within this framework, you can spot what they're doing. Yeah. If a link is broken, you don't need to listen to the rest of the argument. Remember how we talked about this with the chain of syllogisms? If I break one up here and I know that the argument way over at the other end is dependent on this first one up here, I don't need to listen to what's happening at the end until you fix what's happening here. And if they try to get you to think about the end, they're distracting you from their manipulation. They're trying to get you back on circuit 3 so they can maintain their 3-2 slip. And I got to give a note on word salad here. So Deepak Chopra was a perfect example of word salad. And word salad is the usage of a mixture of usually difficult and complicated words to distract the fact that you don't know what you're talking about or you're trying to manipulate somebody. And academics, in quotes, smart people, politicians, they're great at using word salad. And my opinion is, if you really know a subject, you should either be able to understand what the other person's understanding level, simplify it to meet that understanding level, or if that's really impossible, have the humility to be like, hey, look, this is a really complicated topic. Unless you know X, Y, and Z, I really can't explain this to you, right? I mean, kind of similar to this, where I'm like, you got to listen to part 1, or this isn't going to make that much sense. And if someone is using technical language or nomenclature that you can't understand, you have to assume word salad. If someone's really using language you don't understand, and you've kind of indicated to them like, I don't understand what you're saying, and they haven't attempted to dumb it down or to say, hey, look, I can't do it because you need to have this other understanding to understand what I'm saying. If they continue knowing you don't understand, even if what they're saying isn't manipulation, you have to assume that it is. Because why would they continue if they know that you don't understand? And a low IQ person can battle a high IQ person with this. Because high IQ people bully low IQ people around often using word salad. All right, I want to bring in a real world example of how badly things can happen if people en masse start breaking these links, if they start believing in philosophy and acting on philosophy that skirts them from their own responsibility. So as I was putting the final touches of these slides together, I was listening to the most recent Hardcore History podcast by Dan Carlin, which he's doing a series right now on Vikings, and he talked about this battle that I'm going to be describing here in a second. And when I was listening to it, I said, oh my God, that is the perfect example of what I'm talking about and the consequences that arise for what I'm talking about with the chain of responsibility. So back in 991 AD, there was something called the Battle of Malden. This is where the Vikings fought the English, and I have English in quotes here because in 991, it's kind of, sort of, not quite England yet, kind of, sort of beginning to be like England. And this was a relatively small skirmish, right? So, I mean, it's like 100, 200 years now that the Vikings have been raiding and pillaging, I mean, kind of everywhere, going all the way down to Constantinople and all the way over to Greenland and the Americas and everywhere. And in terms of what was at stake here, it was relatively small, regardless of who won the battle. And the English had had a very prosperous society up until this point, so they went into this battle going, "Hey, man, we got this covered. Things have been going great for us. Let's defend ourselves against these Vikings," and then the Vikings win. Now, this was the point that Dan Carlin was making, is that this shouldn't have been that big of a deal. I mean, yeah, that it sucks you lost this one battle, but in terms of the grand scheme of an entire nation, this isn't something that ends the nation. But it kind of did. And the reasoning was, while English society had been very prosperous and I guess at some level had been successfully defending itself against these Viking attacks, the whole clergy had been explaining the reason why, and the entire society had been accepting the reason why, was that God was on England's side. The reason that England was being prosperous and the reason that England was winning is because God is on your side. This is the way that God wants it to be. So when the Vikings win this relatively small skirmish, all of England gives up. All of England gives up, and the reasoning was, if England's prosperity was due to God's favor, if England lost this battle, God must have wanted it that way, and who are we to challenge God? I mean, this is very similar to the predestination criticism that I leveled earlier. And, okay, well, I mean, so Dylan, this is some abstract theology. So what? Well, this had the very real result and very real effect of rape, pillage, plunder, and conquer from Vikings with no resistance. God wanted it that way. I'm not going to resist. Oh, hey, look, now my family is being murdered and enslaved and raped because I did not, I felt that God must have wanted it this way, and I didn't put up any resistance. These ideas, these beliefs have real, serious, dire consequences because they affect personal responsibility. Well, excuse me, they don't affect personal responsibility. They affect interpretation of personal responsibility. The people of England had a responsibility to defend themselves. We're getting attacked by these people who are raiding us all the time. We have a responsibility to defend ourselves. They abdicated that responsibility. This is a fourth link, right? They're breaking the fourth link, going, we are not responsible. God is the one responsible. So if something bad happens to us, that must be because of God. Actually, that brings up a good one. Christian Science. I believe, isn't Christian Science the one where they're not allowed to accept or take any medical treatment? And the whole premise being, well, first of all, God can heal you, and if we, do things the right way and encourage the Spirit of God to come down, you can become healed. But if you take on medical treatment, you're actually refuting God. So the fact that this happened is the way that God wanted it to happen. I mean, it's like that, right? And so you abdicate your personal responsibility, going, well, God will take care of it. Well, last I read and understood the basic interpretation of Genesis is that God made man in his image, meaning he gave free will to man. Man has responsibility, and they need to utilize that responsibility because they have their own free will. This is abdicating free will in the name of God, and they paid for it bitterly by rape, pillage, and plunder. Yeah, fourth link broken. Exactly. Okay, so let's tie this all up. What happens if things are what they are? Which means that things do what they do. Which means that there are things to know and things to understand. Which means that we can act based on that knowledge and understanding, and that we can judge those actions based on the means taken to achieve those actions. What that means is that hard work is required. There is no aspect of reality that gives you a get out of jail free card. There's no aspect of reality that says, yeah, stay on that that lazy boy armchair and just handle everything from there. in order to accomplish, in order to stand up to what you are actually personally responsible for, it is difficult. It is scary, and it requires hard work. And my theory, I'm going to give you a really good example of this in the next slide. My theory is that people become gravitated, or they gravitate toward, they become gravitated. They gravitate toward ideas, religions, philosophies that break these links because they are looking for an excuse to not be responsible for their own actions. You get that? All these philosophies, all these religious ideas, and I mean, I could have dug up more for this presentation, that break any of these 5 links. I'm saying that I think the only reason someone is attracted to those to begin with is because they are looking for a way to get out of their own personal responsibility. Yeah, well, that's what was in the next slide. There it is. Why are people attracted to these things? Because changing yourself is hard. They want to get out of jail free card. Changing yourself is hard. And I want to quote somebody. I've been making fun of some scientists here. And again, thanks, David Harabin, for the presentation on the philosophic corruption of physics. I stole this quote straight from there because it's a good one and it hits the nail on the head of what I'm talking about here. This is a quote from Niels Bohr. This is the Danish physicist who is the founder of quantum theory. So I actually remember when I was taking physical chemistry in college, and that's quantum theory for the chemistry side. They call it quantum in physics, and they call it physical chemistry in chemistry class. And the story about this is that Niels Bohr was the first person to come up with an equation that accurately described the emitted light from a hydrogen atom, because it came. You don't get this band spectrum when you emit light from atoms. You get like these little pieces of different wavelengths of light. And at the time, nobody could figure out why do we get these little pieces of wavelengths of light. And Niels Bohr came up with the first equation. It only described the hydrogen atom, but it did describe the hydrogen atom, which was a big accomplishment. And not all of them, there was a couple exceptions, but almost all the scientists at the time were heavily infected with ideas from Immanuel Kant. Go listen to the philosophic corruption of physics and you'll learn more about that. But there was this one quote that really relates to the chain of responsibility here. This is a quote from Niels Bohr. It has been my desire to emphasize how profoundly the new knowledge, and when he refers to the new knowledge, he's talking about quantum theory, has shaken the foundations underlining the buildup of concepts on which not only classical physics rests, but also all of our ordinary mode of thinking. It is above all to this emancipation that we owe the wonderful progress made during the last generation. The emancipation. And the new knowledge, the quantum physics, this is the stuff where there's no such thing as reality and there's no such thing as cause and effect. Get rid of reality, get rid of causality. Now I'm no longer responsible for anything. It's an emancipation from responsibility. Niels Bohr said it right there. It's an emancipation. And the goal, I'm convinced that it's an emancipation from responsibility. And to say something about Immanuel Kant here real quick. I'm a pretty good reader. And reading Plato, I'm not going to say it's no problem. It's dense and I got to take it slowly. But there has never been anything that I couldn't tackle, any book that I couldn't tackle if I really put my mind to it. I own a book. It's in my library by Immanuel Kant. I think it's The Critique of Pure Reason. I have multiple times attempted to start that book. I cannot get past page 2. Page 2. Like, I'm out by the time I get to page 2. And I've been completely dependent on secondary sources to understand Immanuel Kant. I feel like I'm a pretty smart guy. I cannot read this guy's book, this guy's writing. Just can't handle it. So I know he wrote like volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes, and I've heard the argument that you could actually find any philosophy that you want in Kant because it's so cryptic, and he wrote so much that like you could find him promoting anything within it. Now, I have to rely on these secondary sources, and David Harabin was one of them. And when you look at what Kant proposes, and I gave an idea here on link number 5, how Kant wants to judge off of actions, is essentially Kant goes through the chain of responsibility like this. There's no such thing as reality or the law of identity. There's no such thing as causality. There's no such thing as knowledge. There's no such thing as understanding. Remember that rare chance I said when someone denies the existence of understanding? Immanuel Kant. There's no such thing as understanding. The universe is 100% free will, and we judge, actions should be judged on their intentions. He breaks every single link. Bing, 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 bing. Bing, 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 bing. I added one. He breaks every single link. And it went on to infect so many other ideas. I mean, it bled into physics. I mean, who would ever think that if you didn't listen to something like the philosophic corruption of physics? Like, this is a big deal that seeps into everybody. And it's like nobody has any defense against it. And I'm giving that to you, right? I hope I see that. I'm giving you the defense against stuff like this. So, we're at the end of the 3-part course. And we went over the rules of the game, which are the 4 circuits of human interaction, defining what manipulation is. Went over the theory of the game, where I really took a look through the lens of formal logic to really understand where exactly manipulation occurs. And number 3, which we just went over, is, like I said, becoming skilled at the game. How can you quickly as possible figure out that the 3-2 slip has happened and move on? Because remember, the goal here is to stop being reasonable. And the sooner you figure out what's happening, the sooner that you can stop being reasonable. Now, I've alluded to this the whole time. I've added a part 4 here. And I'll likely make a part 4, but I do want to add something here at the end. Because I do, at some level, have to address strategy. So all this, and I've given some quips about how I would handle certain situations, right? But through all of this, these 3 parts has all been about identification. This is a formulaic way of basically I've built a symbolic map in order to help navigate how to identify manipulation. Now, when it comes to actual strategy, I mentioned this before in a previous part, that it's kind of like a martial art. There's nothing I could tell you. There's nothing that you can watch on a video. There's nothing that you can read in a book that's going to make you good at it. You actually have to practice it. Now, I can give you some ideas that you can go and practice, but you actually have to practice it. And in terms of what's the right way to handle it, it's kind of like saying, what's the correct martial art? Now, you can point to some where you can say that one is clearly bullshit, and that one actually looks pretty effective over there. But I mean, this is like the whole premise of the ultimate fighting or MMA, right? Which is to say, okay, any martial art can get in this ring, and we'll find out who is the best. And it's not always clear. So this strategy or this style or this whatever might have a certain edge over this style, or so on and so forth. There's some styles that get in there and they get their teeth knocked in, right? I'm not saying there aren't bad ideas, but what I'm trying to say is when I'm getting into the conversation of strategy, do not take my style, do not take my way of doing things as the proper way to do it. Okay? I just want to say that. My style has a tendency to be very open and very combative. You don't have to be open, you don't have to be combative. All right? So let's talk about this a little bit. I'll probably make an entire new show to delve into this a little bit more. But let's talk about my basic strategy, just to give an idea. So, battle strategy. The 3-2 slip has been identified. Now what? The first thing is you got to understand that you're having a fight. I've been repeating this for 6 hours now. You have to understand that you're having a fight, and you have to stop being reasonable. You have to stop trying to engage in argument. Argument's kind of a loaded word because in the traditional sense, argument is a very Third Circuit idea, whereas in the colloquial sense, it turns more into like argument means more like a shouting match. I'm referring it into Third Circuit sense. You have to get out of that Third Circuit. Because if you're in the Third Circuit while the other person is manipulating you, you just look like an idiot. You can feel as morally superior as you want. I took the high road. Well, is the high road getting run over? I don't think it's the high road. Is the high road looking bad in front of everybody else? And not only looking bad, having your idea look bad in front of everybody else. If you really think your idea is a good idea, I mean, let's get into some psychology here real quick. If you really think your idea is a good idea, and you debate with somebody, and they pull 3-2 slips on you, and you don't challenge them, and you keep trying to spin, arguing for your idea, everybody who's watching, whether they consciously understand this or not, what they're thinking is, well, if it's such a good idea, why are you losing? Right? Why are you orbiting around him? He's chasing you around the ring. If your idea was good, why aren't you winning? Now, of course, the problem here is that the audience, like I've said before, they don't know any of this. They have no idea what reason is. They have no idea what logic is. They have no idea, when something goes from rational discourse to manipulation. So, yeah, that looks like a rational discourse to me, and you're losing. So your idea must be bad. There is nothing high. There's nothing about staying on the third circuit while you're getting attacked on the second circuit that has anything to do with taking the high road. You're just beating your face into the wall. Understand that. So speed. The second you recognize that a 3-2 slip has occurred, you need to change what you're doing. Now, maybe you have a strategy where you kind of pretend to be reasonable while you kind of fish out and lead a person in a certain direction. I'll do that occasionally. But I know that I'm doing it the second that I realize I'm in a 3-2 slip. I mentioned this before. There's no such thing as a right strategy, but there are such thing as wrong strategies. And I also mentioned this, what was it, in part 1? I don't even remember what part now. That this can be very emotionally unnerving when you do it the first time. If you're used to having the person you're playing chess with make up rules and you just sit there and go, well, I guess I'll just keep following the rules of chess. And if he yells at me, I'll just, try harder. If that's the way you've been living your whole life and you go to challenge the other person, it'll be emotionally unnerving at first. In the beginning, if you're anything like me, you'll likely overdo it. That's fine. If you make mistakes, if you really, really did screw up, you can atone for it later. But hesitation is a weakness. I remember now, I did say this in part 1. Hesitation is a weakness, and the sophist will not hesitate. They see your hesitation as a reason to go in. They see your hesitation of, okay, you lack confidence in your idea. This is what the audience is thinking. This guy lacks confidence in his idea, so it must not be right. Oh, and I do have to emphasize this again. I will likely make a follow-up show just on this topic. I know I have not defined a narcissist from the Four Circuits perspective. Any strategy I talk about at all, do not use on a narcissist. Do not. A narcissist is like sophist on steroids. None of these strategies will work. You have to approach them in a completely different manner. Narcissists are emotionally very dangerous creatures. And you can go listen to some things on what narcissists are. There's YouTube videos are blowing up all over the place about people talking about narcissists. But they are incredibly dangerous, and nothing I've described here will work on them. They will flip it on you so fast you'll be standing on your head before you even realize it. So again, I'm sorry I haven't defined how to recognize a narcissist. I'll do another show later. But if you got a feeling you're dealing with one, don't try what I'm about to tell you. Okay, this is Dylan's default war plan. Doesn't that look like me right there? Be cool. I want that many guns right now. That'd be sweet. Okay, Dylan's default war plan. This is not the strategy I always do. This is one that I like, and this is one that I'm very comfortable with. Step 0, don't be reasonable. We've talked about that ad nauseum. Step 1, identify the 3-2 slip. Now we've talked a couple ways how to do this now. First off, feel your gut. Because sometimes when you're in a heated conversation, you're so focused on the thing that you're saying, you're not paying attention to something like this. So pay attention if your gut starts speaking up and you feel like you're losing. Go back to me and Edward at the table. I thought I'm exchanging information, but I feel like I'm losing. What's going on here? That's your first indication that something's up. We talked about utilizing formal logic to identify 3-2 slips. Perfectly good method. We talked about the chain of responsibility, which I think is an awesome method. I'm going to add one here. Chainsaw laser robot. So, in my discussions with people, as I was formulating these ideas, I'm a guy that needs to bounce ideas off of other people to figure them out. And as I was talking about various ways of utilizing strategy, my friend brought up, that sounds like a chainsaw laser robot. I go, what? And he said, yeah, like in elementary school when you play rock, paper, scissors, and you got that one kid that does chainsaw laser robot to win everything. And I went, oh, I know what you're talking about. I never had a kid who did chainsaw laser robot, but I had, jet fighter, nuclear bomb, rocket launcher. It's basically you play rock, paper, scissors, and there's that one annoying kid that, here's the thing that beats everything. And then it could turn into this game of, okay, well, you got rocket launcher, I've got attack helicopter, you got attack helicopter, I got nuclear bomb. Then it turns into this game of who's the better dorkwad, and likely it was the other kid because he was the one who came up with chainsaw laser robot to begin with, right? So what's a chainsaw laser robot? If you're in a situation where, okay, I can't really spot the fallacy, and I'm not really seeing where this is necessarily breaking a link in the chain of responsibility, this is also kind of a catch-all. The chainsaw laser robot is if somebody is saying something that they could simply repeat and it wins anything that you say. I gave the example earlier. I didn't tell the full story. I'm not going to now. But the altercation I had with a past friend where I had an issue, I brought the issue to his attention, and he said, okay, well, you perceive that this is what's going on. And I said, no, it is what's going on. No, you perceive this is going on. Oh, it is what's going on, and that's what went up from there, right? If I left his point unchallenged, if I say, hey, here's my grievance, and he says, okay, your grievance is that you perceive that it's this thing, if I had missed that and just went on my argument, at any moment through the whole thing, if he ever got backed into a corner, he could always go back to, well, that's just your perception. Well, that's just your perception. Well, that's just your perception. Do you see how there's nothing that you could say against me? If you disagree with me about something, there's nothing that trumps, that's just your perception. Whatever you say, oh, that's just your perception. It's your perception. It's a chainsaw laser robot. It wins against everything, right? God told me to do it. That's the way God wants it. That's the way God wants it. That's the way God wants it. I'm not in control. That's the way God wants it, right? Any of these links, you can break any of these links, any of these fallacies, they could easily turn into a chainsaw laser robot. And the way that you test that is if you're getting this thing, which you suspect might be a chainsaw laser robot from somebody, just imagine, is there anything that I could say that simply can't be trumped by him repeating this? If the answer is no, then you found one. This is the way I am and you can't change me, right? Focus on that sucker and flip it back. Hone in on it like a freaking laser and flip it back. So one thing I'll often do is I'll issue a warning. And often I will say it like this to the person's face. I see that we're fighting and I'm ready to fight you. Now, typically, in my experience, the person doesn't understand what I'm about to do. They're kind of like, huh? Because remember, the reason that these people do this bullshit is because it works. They spent their whole life and it works. They're not used to people fighting back. They're not used to people fighting back. So I'll warn them. And like I said, I don't think I've had a single time where the warning was actually heeded if I got to this point. But it does, there's a little bit of good faith if you give a warning. So after you smack them down, and they're like, oh my God, you're such a bully. I was trying to talk to you. I warned you. Like, what do you want from me? I freaking warned you. I am about to punch you in the nose if you don't stop. Well, boom. Oh my God, you punched me in the nose. What did I tell you? So sometimes I'll issue a warning. Then focus on the problem like a laser. I mentioned this in part 2. With the, if you've got the, you identify a word in that's not following grammatical rules very well, focus on that word like a laser. Focus on the problem like a laser. In the example that I was giving about the what you perceive that that's what's going on, I hopped on that sucker fast. I was putting the ideas together by then, right? I hopped on that sucker fast, where I said, no, it is not my perception, that's what's going on. And now the fight became over whether or not it was my perception or it actually happened. And man, did he squirm. He would not let it go. And the reason is that was his power. If he gave that up, he would have been giving up his power, and he would actually have to address the thing that I was concerned about. If the sophist is tenacious and they're out there, they're not going to let it go. They're going to do everything they can to distract you from it. Oh, let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. You didn't address this other thing. You didn't address that. Oh, about that. No, until you get over this, until you change your motherfucking tone of voice, I'm not telling you anything. Alluding to the beginning story. Until that happens, nothing. Until we get over this thing, nothing. And you might have to repeat it 8 times. You might have to show that you're serious. But I'll guarantee you, once the sophist realizes that they can't get past you, things change. The dynamic completely changes. I mean, I don't know if like there's some second circuit switch in our brains where we recognize who's the alpha and who's not, like the fundamental pecking order, and like you flip some switch in their brain, but it completely changes the interaction. Completely. And if you laser focus on it, you could flip it back at them. You could, well, in the perception thing, I didn't flip it back at them, but in this case, flip the same thing right back at them. Claim the same superpower that they're claiming. This is the way I talk and you can't change me. Well, you seem to have some sort of superpower where you're unable to change, but I have to. Right? You can't change the way that you talk, but I'm supposed to change the way that I'm talking. So in reality, I'm going to claim your superpower. I also can't change the way that I'm talking, and this is the way I'm going to talk back to you, motherfucker. Oh. Well, if you're going to fight back, I guess I can change. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Or the I feel. I feel it's this way. I feel that it's that way. I feel that it's this way. Well, I feel otherwise. And then when they have a problem with the way that you feel, say, whoa, 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 whoa. Same thing with the magic power. What magic power that you have where your feelings are valid to what we're talking about, but mine aren't? How come you get magic power feelings and I don't? What's going on here? You got to make it about what is causing the 3-2 slip. Focus on exactly what is causing the 3-2 slip and do not let them slink away. It might be painful. It might be bloody. They might fight for it. But if you have that laser-like focus, you're going to win. You're going to win. And they know it. That's why they fucking fight so hard against you for it, right? If it wasn't the source of their power, they wouldn't freak out so much about it. Because by exposing it to the light, it becomes obvious and they lose it. And then I should have added this, step 3, in terms of addressing the audience. So you do something like this, audience watches you. I brought this up in part 1. So if you do something like this, audience watches you, you battle it out, and then eventually the guy slinks away, with the grin wiped off his face and his shoulders slouched. And they all lean in and go, wow, you started that fight. You do the same thing to them. No, he started the fight. You all didn't see it. That's what happened. I defended myself. No, Dylan, no. Because what reasoning are they going to have that's not going to be a 3-2 slip? That's not going to break the chain of responsibility. That's not going to be a fallacy. That's not going to be a chainsaw laser robot. They're not. figure out what they're going to use. It's probably going to be even more lame than the person who was watching. The person who got you in the first place. Take them out. I mean, you don't have to take. You're not going to have to take out more than one audience member before the rest of the audience goes, woo! I ain't dealing with this guy. Yeah. And here's my last note. Do not try to win the argument, win the fight. Win the Second Circuit interaction. Not the Third Circuit interaction, the Second Circuit interaction. So let's practice. We already talked about this one. This is how I talk and you can't change me. I did this one too. I know what you said makes sense, but I feel that I'm right. Where's your magic feeling powers? Let's agree to disagree. Okay. I alluded to this one earlier. I think the best way to deal with let's agree to disagree is actually a First Circuit response, right? Is maybe hit them, but take something from them. Take their wallet. Take something, whatever. Do something that they don't like, and when they don't like it, say, whoa, wait a minute. I like it. It's okay with me. What? I think it's mine. Oh, this looks like my wallet. This looks like my car. This is my food. Like, what are you talking about? Well, it's not. It's mine. Well, let's just agree to disagree. It's their stance on that won't last long. Yes, the hidden strike. I had to put this one in red because this is important. So, one thing that I've noticed, and people will do this verbally, but I really noticed it online when I still looked at social media, is, one thing that when I discuss this, people will come up to me and be like, how do I win arguments on Facebook? Easy. Get off of Facebook. Like, you don't win arguments on social media. But when you look, and you will not be able to unsee this after I say this, when you look at how people write on social media, when they just tear at each other going back and forth, when they're pretending to have an argument, the 3-2 slip is usually right in the first sentence. You get this text wall. If you look at sentence number 1, there's some sort of 3-2 slip in here. Now, people usually don't write it this way. The reason is you think that way is because you're an idiot. Or that, that's just your perception. And then they go on to the argument. Well, they're doing the same thing in that that's just your perception example, is that they're setting this weapon aside. So if you engage with any of the argument below, or any of the argument verbally that comes after, they always have this weapon that they can bring back to the table that says, no, but you're an idiot, so whatever you said doesn't matter. No, that's just your perception. So what you said doesn't matter. You see what I'm saying here? You can't really know anything. So here's the explanation of everything that I know. Oh, you responded to that? Well, you can't really know that, can you? Because you didn't challenge it at the beginning. If you leave something like this unchallenged, like I said, it's inches as good as a mile, they will come and use it at any time that they don't like the way that the conversation is going and call it the hidden strike. They put it right out front. And for whatever reason, it ends up in the first sentence. And I give you permission. Just like I said, if you spot a 3-2 slip, you could immediately stop listening. Don't listen to anything else that they say after that, because it's a distraction. If you're reading something, particularly if there's a text wall, read that first sentence. I mean, maybe it's in the second sentence or whatever. As soon as you spot the 3-2 slip, don't read anything else. Do not read anything else. In fact, when I get text walls, someone emails me a text wall or texts me a text wall, I don't read them, because I know the reason that people write text walls is they want to get their point across without you interrupting them, and the only reason they want to do that is to manipulate you. You get that? Don't read text walls. Read the first sentence. If you see that the manipulation is there, do not read the rest. If you choose to engage only on what was that first sentence. No, it is not my perception. It is actually what happened. Okay, so I've been giving these examples throughout the whole damn presentation. Okay, so you perceive that this is a thing that happened. Talked about that. And if I was doing this live, I would then ask for audience examples. So this concludes part 3. Actually, I already concluded part 3. We're kind of into a bit of part 4. But in terms of the podcast that I'm making here, this concludes the entire presentation on intellectual self-defense. I'll be making more on certain topics, like I said, narcissism or more strategy talk. But this is the core. If you listen to this, you sat through all 6 hours or however much time I added up here. You are in a different world of defending yourself against manipulation. You're in a different world against defending yourself against in a different world in defending yourself against manipulation. And I want you to take it and use it. Because, going back to the audience thing, there's so many smart people out there. There's so many people out there that could do good. And because they don't understand how this works, they let other people bully them, or they let the fear of the peer pressure of the audience bully them into submitting. If you could first recognize what's going on, you got to be able to recognize what's going on or you can't do anything. You got to recognize what's going on. Then you have to have the courage to act on it. If we really have good ideas, if the people who like goodness, the people who want freedom, really have good ideas, then those good ideas should beat the bad ideas. And the only way that the good ideas beat the bad ideas is if we could address each circuit at the level that it's coming at us, right? We can only have a debate. The other person's interested in having a debate. If we're going to have a fight, we got to have that fight first, and then hopefully, after the other side's gotten a few bruises, they're more interested in having that debate. So this has been Dylan Moore with IRETA TV, which you could find at ireta.tv. This is, if you made it all the way through here, thanks for listening to the whole thing. I hope this is impactful to you, as it has been to me in my entire life. I am very interested in anybody who starts utilizing this information, what results that you have. And I should give you a warning on this. Let me finish it with this. So I've referred to multiple times of how, I did this traveling stint for 3.5 years with Vermont for a year, ended up in Europe for nearly 2.5 years. I come back to Washington, and I immediately come into conflict with people that I knew. I mean, like this one with the past friend of, you perceive that that's what's going on. That's a friend that I had from the past that I ended up interacting with after I got back from Europe. Is when I started to challenge people, because I was not interested in taking any shit after I got back. I am not going back into that box that you think that you're going to put me back into. Everybody fell into two categories. This is friends and family. The first category were the people that kind of took a step back and thought, I need to reconsider this. And they changed their behavior around me. And we were able to continue being friends or continue being family moving forward. The second group would not change for anything. They would rather die than give up that 3-2 slip power. They would rather die than give up that 3-2 slip power. Now, they might give up in the moment, and the next time you talk to them, they might not push it, but the time after that, it's like this little knife comes out and starts poking around like, can I get the advantage again? This is a warning of what you might experience, is that I don't talk to those people anymore. And funny enough, as I was putting this presentation together, is I actually don't think about this sort of stuff that much as I used to. And I realized the reason is I got rid of everybody in my life that I needed it for, right? I applied it so well, the people who would not stop manipulating me or trying to manipulate me, I don't have any interest in talking to. Why would I? Why would you want somebody like that in your life? Why would you want anybody in your life that does this to you, and after you bring it up to them, refuses to change after attempt after attempt after attempt after attempt after request after request, like, please, can we address this? Can we address this? They won't address it. They can only see you as being manipulated. Do you think your life may be different if you were able to identify those people, know who they were, and then have the ability, have the free will choice to stop being around them, to remove them? I think you might have a much different life if you did. So again, This has been Dylan Moore with Irita TV, which you can find at irita.tv. I appreciate you watching this. Please send me your feedback, and I'll see you on the next show.